Chapter 1. There are heroisms all round us. Mr. Hungerton, her father, really was the most tactless person upon earth, a fluffy, feathery, untidy cockatoo of a man, perfectly good-natured, but absolutely centered upon his own silly self. If anything could have driven me from Gladys, it would have been the thought of such a father-in-law. I am convinced that he really believed in his heart that I came round to the Chestnuts 3 days a week for the pleasure of his company, and very especially to hear his views upon bimetallism, a subject upon which he was by way of being an authority. For an hour or more that evening I listened to his monotonous chirrup about bad money driving out good, the token value of silver, the depreciation of the rupee, and the true standards of exchange. Suppose, he cried with feeble violence, that all the debts in the world were called up simultaneously and immediate payment insisted upon, what under our present conditions would happen then? I gave the self-evident answer that I should be a ruined man, upon which he jumped from his chair, reproved me for my habitual levity, which made it impossible for him to discuss any reasonable subject in my presence, and bounced off out of the room to dress for a Masonic meeting. At last I was alone with Gladys, and the moment of fate had come. Warm all that evening I had felt like the soldier who awaits the signal which will send him on a forlorn hope of victory and fear of repulse alternating in his mind. She sat with that proud, delicate profile of hers outlined against the red curtain. How beautiful she was, and yet how aloof. We had been friends, quite good friends, but never could I get beyond the same comradeship which I might have established with one of my fellow reporters upon the Gazette, perfectly frank, perfectly kindly, and perfectly unsexual. My instincts are all against a woman being too frank and at her ease with me. It is no compliment to a man. Where the real sex feeling begins, timidity and distrust are its companions, heritage from old wicked days when love and violence went often hand in hand. The bent head, the averted eye, the faltering voice, the wincing figure, these, and not the unshrinking gaze and frank reply, are the true signals of passion. Even in my short life I had learned as much as that, or had inherited it in that race memory which we call instinct. Gladys was full of every womanly quality. Some judged her to be cold and hard, but such a thought was treason. That delicately bronzed skin, almost oriental in its coloring, that raven hair, the large liquid eyes, the full but exquisite lips, all the stigmata of passion were there. But I was sadly conscious that up to now I had never found the secret of drawing it forth. However, come what might, I should have done with suspense and bring matters to a head tonight. She could but refuse me, and better be a repulsed lover than an accepted brother. So far my thoughts had carried me, and I was about to break the long and uneasy silence, when 2 critical, dark eyes looked round at me, and the proud head was shaken in smiling reproof. "I have a presentiment that you are going to propose, Ned. I do wish you wouldn't, for things are so much nicer as they are." I drew my chair a little nearer. "Now, how did you know that I was going to propose?" I asked in genuine wonder. "Don't women always know? Do you suppose any woman in the world was ever taken unawares? But, oh, Ned, our friendship has been so good and so pleasant. What a pity to spoil it. Don't you feel how splendid it is that a young man and a young woman should be able to talk face to face as we have talked?" "I don't know, Gladys. You see, I can talk face to face with the station master. I can't imagine how that official came into the matter, but in he trotted and set us both laughing. That does not satisfy me in the least. I want my arms round you, and your head on my breast, and, oh, Gladys, I want—" She had sprung from her chair as she saw signs that I proposed to demonstrate some of my wants. "You've spoiled everything, Ned," she said. "It's all so beautiful and natural until this kind of thing comes in.
It is such a pity. Why can't you control yourself?" "I didn't invent it," I pleaded. "It's nature. It's love." "Well, perhaps if both love, it may be different. I have never felt it. But you must. You with your beauty, with your soul. Oh, Gladys, you were made for love. You must love. One must wait till it comes. But why can't you love me, Gladys? Is it my appearance, or what?" She did unbend a little. She put forward a hand, such a gracious, stooping attitude it was, and she pressed back my head. Then she looked into my upturned face with a very wistful smile. "No, it isn't that," she said at last. "You're not a conceited boy by nature, and so I can safely tell you it is not that. It's deeper." "My character?" She nodded severely. "What can I do to mend it? Do sit down and talk it over." "No, really, I won't if you'll only sit down." She looked at me with a wondering distrust, which was much more to my mind than her whole-hearted confidence. "Now tell me, what's amiss with me?" "I'm in love with somebody else," said she. It was my turn to jump out of my chair. "It's nobody in particular," she explained, laughing at the expression of my face. "Only an ideal. I've never met the kind of man I mean." "Tell me about him. What does he look like?" "Oh, he might look very much like you." "How dear of you to say that. Well, what is it that he does that I don't do? Just say the word." "Teetotal, vegetarian, aeronaut, theosophist, superman. I'll have a try at it, Gladys, if you will only give me an idea what would please you." She laughed at the elasticity of my character. "Well, in the first place, I don't think my ideal would speak like that," said she. "He would be a harder, sterner man, not so ready to adapt himself to a silly girl's whim. But, above all, he must be a man who could do, who could act, who could look death in the face and have no fear of him, a man of great deeds and strange experiences. It is never a man that I should love, but always the glories he had won, for they would be reflected upon me. Think of Richard Burton. When I read his wife's life of him, I could so understand her love. And Lady Stanley. Did you ever read the wonderful last chapter of that book about her husband? These are the sort of men that a woman could worship with all her soul, and yet be the greater, not the less, on account of her love, honored by all the world as the inspirer of noble deeds." She looked so beautiful in her enthusiasm that I nearly brought down the whole level of the interview. I gripped myself hard and went on with the argument. "We can't all be Stanleys and Burtons," said I. "Besides, we don't get the chance. At least, I never had the chance. If I did, I should try to take it." "But chances are all around you. It is the mark of the kind of man I mean that he makes his own chances. You can't hold him back. I've never met him, and yet I seem to know him so well. There are heroisms all round us waiting to be done. It's for men to do them, and for women to reserve their love as a reward for such men. Look at that young Frenchman who went up last week in a balloon. It was blowing a gale of wind, but because he was announced to go, he insisted on starting. The wind blew him 1,500 miles in 24 hours, and he fell in the middle of Russia. That was the kind of man I mean. Think of the woman he loved, and how other women must have envied her. That's what I should like to be, envied for my man." "I'd have done it to please you." "But you shouldn't do it merely to please me. You should do it because you can't help yourself, because it's natural to you, because the man in you is crying out for heroic expression. Now, when you described the Wigan coal explosion last month, could you not have gone down and helped those people in spite of the choke damp?" "I did." "You never said so." "There was nothing worth bucking about. I didn't know." She looked at me with rather more interest. "That was brave of you." "I had to. If you want to write good copy, you must be where the things are." "What a prosaic motive. It seems to take all the romance out of it. But still, whatever your motive, I am glad that you went down that mine." She gave me her hand, but with such sweetness and dignity that I could only stoop and kiss it. I dare say I am merely a foolish woman with a young girl's fancies, and yet it is so real with me, so entirely part of my very self, that I cannot help acting upon it. If I marry, I do want to marry a famous man. "Why should you not?" I cried. "It is women like you who brace men up. Give me a chance and see if I will take it. Besides, as you say, men ought to make their own chances and not wait until they are given. Look at Clive, just a clerk, and he conquered India. By George, I'll do something in the world yet." She laughed at my sudden Irish effervescence. "Why not?" she said. "You have everything a man could have: youth, health, strength, education, energy." I was sorry you spoke. "And now I am glad, so glad, if it wakens these thoughts in you." "And if I do?" Her dear hand rested like warm velvet upon my lips. "Not another word, sir. You should have been at the office for evening duty half an hour ago, only I hadn't the heart to remind you. Some day, perhaps, when you have won your place in the world, we shall talk it over again." And so it was that I found myself that foggy November evening pursuing the Camberwell tram with my heart glowing within me, and with the eager determination that not another day should elapse before I should find some deed which was worthy of my lady. But who in all this wide world could ever have imagined the incredible shape which that deed was to take, or the strange steps by which I was led to the doing of it? And, after all, this opening chapter will seem to the reader to have nothing to do with my narrative, and yet there would have been no narrative without it, for it is only when a man goes out into the world with the thought that there are heroisms all round him, and with the desire all alive in his heart to follow any which may come within sight of him, that he breaks away, as I did, from the life he knows, and ventures forth into the wonderful mystic twilight land, where lie the great adventures and the great rewards. Behold me, then, at the office of the Daily Gazette, on the staff of which I was a most insignificant unit, with the settled determination that very night, if possible, to find the quest which should be worthy of my Gladys. Was it hardness, was it selfishness, that she should ask me to risk my life for her own glorification? Such thoughts may come to middle age, but never to ardent 23 in the fever of his first love. Chapter 2. Try your luck with Professor Challenger. I always liked McArdle, the crabbed, old, round-backed, red-headed news editor, and I rather hoped that he liked me. Of course, Beaumont was the real boss, but he lived in the rarefied atmosphere of some Olympian height, from which he could distinguish nothing smaller than an international crisis or a split in the cabinet. Sometimes we saw him passing in lonely majesty to his inner sanctum, with his eyes staring vaguely and his mind hovering over the Balkans or the Persian Gulf. He was above and beyond us. But McArdle was his first lieutenant, and it was he that we knew. The old man nodded as I entered the room, and he pushed his spectacles far up on his bald forehead. "Well, Mr. Malone, from all I hear, you seem to be doing very well," said he in his kindly Scotch accent. I thanked him. The colliery explosion was excellent. So was the Southwark fire. You have the true descriptive touch. What did you want to see me about? To ask a favour. He looked alarmed, and his eyes shunned mine. Tut, tut, what is it? Do you think, sir, that you could possibly send me on some mission for the paper? I would do my best to put it through and get you some good copy. What sort of mission had you in your mind, Mr. Malone? Well, sir, anything that had adventure and danger in it. I really would do my very best. The more difficult it was, the better it would suit me. You seem very anxious to lose your life.
To justify my life, sir? Dear me, Mr. Malone, this is very, very exalted. I'm afraid the day for this sort of thing is rather past. The expense of the special mission business hardly justifies the result, and, of course, in any case it would only be an experienced man with a name that would command public confidence who would get such an order. The big blank spaces in the map are all being filled in, and there's no room for romance anywhere. Wait a bit, though, he added, with a sudden smile upon his face. Talking of the blank spaces of the map gives me an idea. What about exposing a fraud, a modern Munchausen, and making him ridiculous? You could show him up as the liar that he is. Man, it would be fine. How does it appeal to you? Anything, anywhere, I care nothing. McArdle was plunged in thought for some minutes. I wonder whether you could get on friendly, or at least on talking terms with the fellow, he said at last. You seem to have a sort of genius for establishing relations with people. Sympathy, I suppose, or animal magnetism, or youthful vitality, or something. I am conscious of it myself. You are very good, sir. So why should you not try your luck with Professor Challenger of Enmore Park? I dare say I looked a little startled. Challenger? I cried. Professor Challenger, the famous zoologist. Wasn't he the man who broke the skull of Blundell, of the Telegraph? The news editor smiled grimly. Do you mind? Didn't you say it was adventures you were after? It is all in the way of business, sir, I answered. Exactly. I don't suppose he can always be so violent as that. I'm thinking that Blundell got him at the wrong moment, maybe, or in the wrong fashion. You may have better luck, or more tact in handling him. There's something in your line there, I am sure, and the Gazette should work it. I really know nothing about him, said I. I only remember his name in connection with the police court proceedings, for striking Blundell. I have a few notes for your guidance, Mr. Malone. I've had my eye on the professor for some little time. He took a paper from a drawer. Here is a summary of his record. I give it you briefly. Challenger, George Edward, born, Largs, North Bowling, 1863. Educator, Largs Academy, Edinburgh University. British Museum Assistant, 1892. Assistant Keeper of Comparative Anthropology Department, 1893. Resigned after acrimonious correspondence, same year. Winner of Crayston Medal for Zoological Research. Foreign member of, well, quite a lot of things. About 2 inches of small type. Société Belge, American Academy of Sciences, La Plata, etc., etc. Ex-President Paleontological Society, Section H, British Association, so on, so on. Publications, some observations upon a series of Kalmeek skulls, outlines of vertebrate evolution, and numerous papers, including The Underlying Fallacy of Weissmannism, which caused heated discussion at the Zoological Congress of Vienna. Recreations, walking, alpine climbing. Address, Enmore Park, Kensington, West. There. Take it with you. I've nothing more for you tonight. I've pocketed the slip of paper. One moment, sir, I said, as I realized that it was a pink bald head and not a red face which was fronting me. I am not very clear yet why I am to interview this gentleman. What has he done? The face flashed back again. Went to South America on a solitary expedition 2 years ago. Came back last year. Had undoubtedly been to South America, but refused to say exactly where. Began to tell his adventures in a vague way, but somebody started to pick holes, and he just shut up like an oyster. Something wonderful happened, or the man's a champion liar, which is the more probable supposition. Had some damaged photographs, said to be fakes.
got so touchy that he assaults anyone who asks questions and heaves reporters down the stairs. In my opinion, he's just a homicidal megalomaniac with a turn for science. That's your man, Mr. Malone. Now, off you run, and see what you can make of him. You're big enough to look after yourself. Anyway, you are all safe. Employers' Liability Act, you know. A grinning red face turned once more into a pink oval, fringed with gingery fluff. The interview was at an end. I walked across to the Savage Club, but instead of turning into it, I leaned upon the railings of Adelphi Terrace and gazed thoughtfully for a long time at the brown, oily river. I can always think most sanely and clearly in the open air. I took out the list of Professor Challenger's exploits, and I read it over under the electric lamp. Then I had what I can only regard as an inspiration. As a pressman, I felt sure from what I had been told that I could never hope to get into touch with this cantankerous professor, but these recriminations, twice mentioned in his skeleton biography, could only mean that he was a fanatic in science. Was there not an exposed margin there upon which he might be accessible? I would try. I entered the club. It was just after 11, and the big room was fairly full, though the rush had not yet set in. I noticed a tall, thin, angular man seated in an armchair by the fire. He turned as I drew my chair up to him. It was the man of all others whom I should have chosen. Tarp Henry, of the staff of nature, a thin, dry, leathery creature who was full, to those who knew him, of kindly humanity. I plunged instantly into my subject. What do you know of Professor Challenger? Challenger? He gathered his brows in scientific disapproval. Challenger was the man who came with some cock-and-bull story from South America. What story? Oh, it was rank nonsense about some queer animals he had discovered. I believe he has retracted since. Anyhow, he has suppressed it all. He gave an interview to Reuters, and there was such a howl that he saw it wouldn't do. It was a discreditable business. There were one or two folk who were inclined to take him seriously, but he soon choked them off. How? Well, by his insufferable rudeness and impossible behavior. There was poor old Wadley of the Zoological Institute. Wadley sent a message. The president of the Zoological Institute presents his compliments to Professor Challenger and would take it as a personal favor if he would do them the honor to come to their next meeting. The answer was unprintable. You don't say. Well, a bowdlerized version of it would run, Professor Challenger presents his compliments to the president of the Zoological Institute and would take it as a personal favor if he would go to the devil. Good Lord! Yes, I expect that's what old Wadley said. I remember his wail at the meeting, which began, "In 50 years' experience of scientific intercourse." It quite broke the old man up. Anything more about Challenger? Well, I'm a bacteriologist, you know. I live in a 900 diameter microscope. I can hardly claim to take serious notice of anything that I can see with my naked eye. I'm a frontiersman from the extreme edge of the knowable, and I feel quite out of place when I leave my study and come into touch with all you great, rough, hulking creatures. I'm too detached to talk scandal, and yet, at scientific conversaciones, I have heard something of Challenger, for he is one of those men whom nobody can ignore. He's as clever as they make 'em, a full-charge battery of force and vitality, but a quarrelsome, ill-conditioned faddist, and unscrupulous at that. He had gone the length of faking some photographs over the South American business. You say he is a faddist? What is his particular fad? He has 1,000, but the latest is something about Wisman and evolution. He had a fearful row about it in Vienna, I believe. Can't you tell me the point? Not at the moment, but a translation of the proceedings exists. We have it filed at the office. Would you care to come? It's just what I want. I have to interview the fellow, and I need some lead up to him. It's really awfully good of you to give me a lift. I'll go with you now, if it is not too late. Half an hour later, I was seated in the newspaper office with a huge tome in front of me, which had been opened at the article Weismann versus Darwin with the subheading Spirited Protest at Vienna, Lively Proceedings. My scientific education having been somewhat neglected, I was unable to follow the whole argument, but it was evident that the English professor had handled his subject in a very aggressive fashion, and had thoroughly annoyed his continental colleagues. Protests, uproar, and general appeal to the chairman were three of the first brackets which caught my eye. Most of the matter might have been written in Chinese for any definite meaning that it conveyed to my brain. I wish you could translate it into English for me, I said, pathetically, to my helpmate. Well, it is a translation. Then I'd better try my luck with the original. It is certainly rather deep for a layman. If I could only get a single good, meaty sentence which seemed to convey some sort of definite human idea, it would serve my turn. Ah, yes, this one will do. I seem in a vague way almost to understand it. I'll copy it out. This shall be my link with the terrible professor. Nothing else I can do? Well, yes. I propose to write to him. If I could frame the letter here and use your address, it would give atmosphere. We'll have the fellow round here making a row and breaking the furniture. No, you'll see the letter. Nothing contentious, I assure you. Well, that's my chair and desk. You'll find paper there. I'd like to censor it before it goes. It took some doing, but I flatter myself that it wasn't such a bad job when it was finished. I read it aloud to the critical bacteriologist with some pride in my handiwork. Dear Professor Challenger, it said, as a humble student of nature, I have always taken the most profound interest in your speculations as to the differences between Darwin and Weismann. I have recently had occasion to refresh my memory by rereading You Infernal Liar, murmured Tarp Henry, by rereading your masterly address at Vienna. That lucid and admirable statement seems to be the last word in the matter. There is one sentence in it, however, namely, I protest strongly against the insufferable and entirely dogmatic assertion that each separate id is a microcosm possessed of an historical architecture elaborated slowly through the series of generations. Have you no desire, in view of later research, to modify this statement? Do you not think that it is over-accentuated? With your permission, I would ask the favor of an interview, as I feel strongly upon the subject, and have certain suggestions which I could only elaborate in a personal conversation. With your consent, I trust to have the honor of calling at 11 o'clock the day after tomorrow, Wednesday, morning. I remain, sir, with assurances of profound respect, yours very truly, Edward D. Malone. How's that? I asked triumphantly. Well, if your conscience can stand it. It has never failed me yet. But what do you mean to do? To get there. Once I am in his room, I may see some opening. I may even go the length of open confession. If he's a sportsman, he will be tickled. Tickled indeed. He's much more likely to do the tickling. Chainmail or an American football suit, that's what you'll want. Well, goodbye. I'll have the answer for you here on Wednesday morning, if he ever deigns to answer you. He is a violent, dangerous, cantankerous character, hated by everyone who comes across him, and the butt of the students, so far as they dare take a liberty with him. Perhaps it would be best for you if you never heard from the fellow at all. Chapter 3. He is a perfectly impossible person. My friend's fear or hope was not destined to be realized. When I called on Wednesday, there was a letter with the West Kensington postmark upon it, and my name scrawled across the envelope in a handwriting which looked like a barbed wire railing. The contents were as follows: Enmore Park, W. Sir, I have duly received your note, in which you claim to endorse my views, although I am not aware that they are dependent upon endorsement either from you or anyone else. You have ventured to use the word speculation with regard to my statement upon the subject of Darwinism, and I would call your attention to the fact that such a word in such a connection is offensive to a degree. The context convinces me, however, that you have sinned rather through ignorance and tactlessness than through malice, so I am content to pass the matter by. You quote an isolated sentence from my lecture and appear to have some difficulty in understanding it. I should have thought that only a subhuman intelligence could have failed to grasp the point, but if it really needs amplification, I shall consent to see you at the hour named, though visits and visitors of every sort are exceeding distasteful to me. As to your suggestion that I may modify my opinion, I would have you know that it is not my habit to do so after a deliberate expression of my mature views. You will kindly show the envelope of this letter to my man, Austin, when you call, as he has to take every precaution to shield me from the intrusive rascals who call themselves journalists. Yours faithfully, George Edward Challenger. This was the letter that I read aloud to Tarp Henry, who had come down early to hear the result of my venture. His only remark was, "There's some new stuff, cuticura or something, which is better than arnica." Some people have such extraordinary notions of humour. It was nearly 10:30 before I had received my message, but a taxicab took me round in good time for my appointment. It was an imposing porticoed house at which we stopped, and the heavily curtained windows gave every indication of wealth upon the part of this formidable professor. The door was opened by an odd, swarthy, dried-up person of uncertain age, with a dark pilot jacket and brown leather gaiters. I found afterwards that he was the chauffeur, who filled the gaps left by a succession of fugitive butlers. He looked me up and down with a searching, light-blue eye. "Expected?" he asked. "An appointment. Got your letter?" I produced the envelope. "Right." He seemed to be a person of few words. Following him down the passage, I was suddenly interrupted by a small woman who stepped out from what proved to be the dining-room door. She was a bright, vivacious, dark-eyed lady, more French than English in her type. "One moment," she said. "You can wait, Austin. Step in here, sir. May I ask if you have met my husband before?" "No, madam, I have not had the honor." "Then I apologize to you in advance. I must tell you that he is a perfectly impossible person. Absolutely impossible. If you are forewarned, you will be the more ready to make allowances." "It is most considerate of you, madam." "Get quickly out of the room if he seems inclined to be violent. Don't wait to argue with him. Several people have been injured through doing that. Afterwards, there is a public scandal, and it reflects upon me and all of us. I suppose it wasn't about South America you wanted to see him." I could not lie to a lady. "Dear me, that is his most dangerous subject. You won't believe a word he says, I'm sure I don't wonder. But don't tell him so, for it makes him very violent. Pretend to believe him, and you may get through all right. Remember, he believes it himself. Of that you may be assured. A more honest man never lived. Don't wait any longer, or he may suspect. If you find him dangerous, really dangerous, ring the bell and hold him off until I come. Even at his worst, I can usually control him." With these encouraging words, the lady handed me over to the taciturn Austin, who had waited like a bronze statue of discretion during our short interview, and I was conducted to the end of the passage. There was a tap at a door, a bull's bellow from within, and I was face to face with the professor. He sat in a rotating chair behind a broad table, which was covered with books, maps, and diagrams. As I entered, his seat spun round to face me. His appearance made me gasp. I was prepared for something strange, but not for so overpowering a personality as this. It was his size which took one's breath away. His size and his imposing presence. His head was enormous, the largest I have ever seen upon a human being. I am sure that his top hat, had I ever ventured to don it, would have slipped over me entirely and rested on my shoulders. He had the face and beard which I associate with an Assyrian bull, the former florid, the latter so black as almost to have a suspicion of blue, spade-shaped and rippling down over his chest. The hair was peculiar, plastered down in front in a long, curving wisp over his massive forehead. The eyes were blue-grey under great black tufts, very clear, very critical, and very masterful. A huge spread of shoulders and a chest like a barrel were the other parts of him which appeared above the table, save for two enormous hands covered with long black hair. This and a bellowing, roaring, rumbling voice made up my first impression of the notorious Professor Challenger. "Well," said he, with a most insolent stare, "what now?" I must keep up my deception for at least a little time longer, otherwise here was evidently an end of the interview. "You were good enough to give me an appointment, sir," said I, humbly, producing his envelope. He took my letter from his desk and laid it out before him. "Oh, you are the young person who cannot understand plain English, are you? My general conclusions you are good enough to approve, as I understand." "Entirely, sir, entirely." I was very emphatic, soft. "Dear me, that strengthens my position very much, does it not? Your age and appearance make your support doubly valuable. Well, at least you are better than that herd of swine in Vienna, whose gregarious grunt is, however, not more offensive than the isolated effort of the British hog." He glared at me as the present representative of the beast. "They seem to have behaved abominably," said I. "Soft, I assure you that I can fight my own battles, and that I have no possible need of your sympathy. Put me alone, sir, and with my back to the wall. GEC is happiest then." "Well, sir, let us do what we can to curtail this visit, which can hardly be agreeable to you, and is inexpressibly irksome to me. You had, as I have been led to believe, some comments to make upon the proposition which I advanced in my thesis. There was a brutal directness about his methods which made evasion difficult. I must still make play and wait for a better opening. It had seemed simple enough at a distance. Oh, my Irish wits, could they not help me now, when I needed help so sorely? He transfixed me with two sharp, steely eyes. "Come, come," he rumbled. "I am, of course, a mere student," said I, with a fatuous smile, hardly more, I might say, than an earnest inquirer. At the same time, it seemed to me that you were a little severe upon Weissman in this matter. Has not the general evidence since that date tended to, well, to strengthen his position?" "What evidence?" He spoke with a menacing calm. "Well, of course I am aware that there is not any, what you might call, definite evidence. I alluded merely to the trend of modern thought and the general scientific point of view, if I might so express it." He leaned forward with great earnestness. "I suppose you are aware," said he, checking off points upon his fingers, "that the cranial index is a constant factor." "Naturally," said I. "And that telegony is still sub judice?" "Undoubtedly." "And that the germ plasm is different from the parthenogenetic egg?" "Why, surely," I cried, and gloried in my own audacity. The interview continued in this vein for some time, with the professor growing more and more animated as he expounded his views. But I must confess that my mind was wandering a little, for I was waiting for the moment when I might safely turn the conversation toward South America. At last, the opportunity came. Eventually, after much back and forth, the professor's temper flared, and the meeting ended rather abruptly,
with me making a hasty retreat, but not before I had glimpsed something of the extraordinary man behind the bluster.
Chapter 4. It's just the very biggest thing in the world. Hardly was the door shut when Mrs. Challenger darted out from the dining room. The small woman was in a furious temper. She barred her husband's way like an enraged chicken in front of a bulldog. It was evident that she had seen my exit, but had not observed my return. "You brute, George!" she screamed. "You've hurt that nice young man." He jerked backwards with his thumb.
"Here he is, safe and sound behind me." She was confused, but not unduly so.
"I am so sorry, I didn't see you."
"I assure you, madam, that it is all right."
"He has marked your poor face. Oh, George, what a brute you are. Nothing but scandals from one end of the week to the other. Everyone hating and making fun of you. You've finished my patience. This ends it."
"Dirty linen," he rumbled.
"It's not a secret," she cried. "Do you suppose that the whole street, the whole of London for that matter— Get away, Austin, we don't want you here. Do you suppose they don't all talk about you? Where is your dignity? You, a man who should have been Regius Professor at a great university with 1,000 students all revering you. Where is your dignity, George? How about yours, my dear? You try me too much. A ruffian, a common, brawling ruffian. That's what you have become. Be good, Jessie. A roaring, raging bully. That's done it. Stool of penance," said he. To my amazement, he stooped, picked her up, and placed her sitting upon a high pedestal of black marble in the angle of the hall. It was at least 7 feet high, and so thin that she could hardly balance upon it. A more absurd object than she presented cocked up there with her face convulsed with anger, her feet dangling, and her body rigid for fear of an upset, I could not imagine. "Let me down," she wailed. "Say please. You brute, George, let me down this instant." "Come into the study, Mr. Malone." "Really, sir," said I, looking at the lady. "Here's Mr. Malone pleading for you, Jessie. Say please, and down you come." "Oh, you brute! Please, please." He took her down as if she had been a canary. "You must behave yourself, dear. Mr. Malone is a pressman. He will have it all in his rag tomorrow and sell an extra dozen among our neighbors. Strange story of high life. You felt fairly high on that pedestal, did you not? Then a subtitle, Glimpse of a Singular Menage. He's a foul feeder, is Mr. Malone, a carrion eater, like all of his kind, porcus ex grege diaboli, a swine from the devil's herd. That's it, Malone. What? You are really intolerable, said I, hotly. He bellowed with laughter. We shall have a coalition presently, he boomed, looking from his wife to me and puffing out his enormous chest. Then, suddenly altering his tone, excuse this frivolous family badinage, Mr. Malone. I called you back for some more serious purpose than to mix you up with our little domestic pleasantries. Run away, little woman, and don't fret. He placed a huge hand upon each of her shoulders. All that you say is perfectly true. I should be a better man if I did what you advise, but I shouldn't be quite George Edward Challenger. There are plenty of better men, my dear, but only one GEC, so make the best of him. He suddenly gave her a resounding kiss, which embarrassed me even more than his violence had done. Now, Mr. Malone, he continued, with a great accession of dignity, this way, if you please. We re-entered the room which we had left so tumultuously 10 minutes before. The professor closed the door carefully behind us, motioned me into an armchair, and pushed a cigar box under my nose. Real San Juan, Colorado, he said. Excitable people like you are the better for narcotics. Heavens, don't bite it. Cut, and cut with reverence. Now lean back and listen attentively to whatever I may care to say to you. If any remark should occur to you, you can reserve it for some more opportune time. First of all, as to your return to my house after your most justifiable expulsion.
He protruded his beard and stared at me as one who challenges and invites contradiction. After, as I say, your well-merited expulsion, the reason lay in your answer to that most officious policeman, in which I seemed to discern some glimmering of good feeling upon your part, more, at any rate, than I am accustomed to associate with your profession. In admitting that the fault of the incident lay with you, you gave some evidence of a certain mental detachment and breadth of view which attracted my favorable notice. The subspecies of the human race to which you unfortunately belong has always been below my mental horizon. Your words brought you suddenly above it. You swam up into my serious notice. For this reason I ask you to return with me, as I was minded to make your further acquaintance. You will kindly deposit your ash in the small Japanese tray on the bamboo table which stands at your left elbow. All this he boomed forth like a professor addressing his class. He had swung round his revolving chair so as to face me, and he sat all puffed out like an enormous bullfrog, his head laid back, and his eyes half covered by supercilious lids. Now he suddenly turned himself sideways, and all I could see of him was tangled hair with a red, protruding ear. He was scratching about among the litter of papers upon his desk. He faced me presently with what looked like a very tattered sketchbook in his hand. "I am going to talk to you about South America," said he. "No comments, if you please. First of all, I wish you to understand that nothing I tell you now is to be repeated in any public way unless you have my express permission. That permission will, in all human probability, never be given. Is that clear?" "It is very hard," said I. "Surely a judicious account—" He replaced the notebook upon the table. "That ends it," said he. "I wish you a very good morning." "No, no," I cried. "I submit to any conditions. So far as I can see, I have no choice." "None in the world," said he. "Well then, I promise. Word of honor?" "Word of honor." He looked at me with doubt in his insolent eyes. "After all, what do I know about your honor?" said he. "Upon my word, sir," I cried, angrily, "you take very great liberties. I have never been so insulted in my life." He seemed more interested than annoyed at my outbreak. "Round-headed," he muttered, "brachycephalic, grey-eyed, black-haired, with suggestion of the negroid. Celtic, I presume?" "I am an Irishman, sir." Irish? Yes, sir. That, of course, explains it. Let me see. You have given me your promise that my confidence will be respected. That confidence, I may say, will be far from complete, but I am prepared to give you a few indications which will be of interest. In the first place, you are probably aware that 2 years ago I made a journey to South America, one which will be classical in the scientific history of the world. The object of my journey was to verify some conclusions of Wallace and of Bates, which could only be done by observing their reported facts under the same conditions in which they had themselves noted them. If my expedition had no other results, it would still have been noteworthy, but a curious incident occurred to me while there, which opened up an entirely fresh line of inquiry. You are aware, or probably in this half-educated age, you are not aware, that the country round some parts of the Amazon is still only partially explored, and that a great number of tributaries, some of them entirely uncharted, run into the main river. It was my business to visit this little-known back country and to examine its fauna, which furnished me with the materials for several chapters for that great and monumental work upon zoology, which will be my life's justification. Chapter 5. Question. The professor's voice had a peculiar quality as he spoke of South America. It was as if the words themselves carried the heavy, humid air of the great river and the mysterious silence of the unknown forests. He leaned forward in his chair, his enormous hands spread out upon the littered table and his great Assyrian beard jutting forward like the prow of a ship. "I had occasion," he continued, to spend a night at a small Indian village, at a point where a certain tributary, the name is immaterial, flows into the Amazon. The chief of the village had a bad wound in his thigh from the tooth of a black caiman, and I was able to render him some small service. In return, he and his people showed me every kindness. Among other things, they allowed me to examine a curious object which one of the hunters had brought in from the forest only a few days before. It was the wing of a creature such as no living man had ever seen. It was not the wing of a bird, nor of a bat, nor of any known insect. It was a leathery membrane, strongly veined, and attached to a framework of bone which suggested a gigantic lizard of some long-vanished age. I examined it with the utmost care. It was fresh, undoubtedly fresh. The edges still showed traces of blood. The creature from which it had come could not have been killed more than a few hours earlier. My Indian friends told me a strange story. They said that far up the river, beyond the rapids and the falls, there lay a high plateau, cut off from the rest of the world by sheer cliffs thousands of feet high. Upon that plateau, they declared, the ancient creatures of which their fathers had spoken still lived, great beasts that walked upon two legs like men, flying dragons with wings of leather, and other monsters long since vanished from the face of the earth. At first I smiled at their superstition, but the wing in my hand was real. I could not doubt the evidence of my own senses. I questioned them closely. They drew maps upon the ground with sticks. They described the plateau as a place of mists and dense forests, where the sun was often hidden, and strange cries echoed through the trees. No man of their tribe had ever set foot upon it, for the cliffs were unscalable, and the spirits of the old times guarded the approaches. That night, as I lay in my hammock under the stars, my mind was in a whirl. Could it be possible? Could there still exist upon this earth a fragment of the Jurassic or Cretaceous age, a lost world where the great reptiles of the past still roamed? I determined to see for myself. The next morning, I set out with 2 Indian guides and a few bearers. For days, we forced our way through the dense jungle, following the course of the tributary. The heat was oppressive, the insects a torment, but my purpose held me up. At last, we came to the place the Indians had described. Before us rose a tremendous line of basalt cliffs, black and forbidding, towering thousands of feet into the sky. They stretched away to right and left as far as the eye could reach, an impregnable barrier. At one point there appeared to be a break, a narrow gorge where a stream tumbled down in a series of cascades. My Indians refused to go further. They pointed upward with trembling fingers and made signs of terror. But I was not to be turned back. Alone I began the ascent. It was a terrible climb. More than once I thought my last hour had come, but at length, bruised and bleeding, I reached the top and stood upon the edge of the plateau. What I saw there I shall never forget. Spread out before me was a vast tableland, many miles across, covered with dense forest and intersected by open glades. In the distance, I could see the gleam of water, but it was not the landscape alone that held me spellbound. From the depths of the forest came strange sounds, deep bellowings, shrill cries, and once a long trumpeting call such as no living animal known to science could have uttered. As I stood there, my heart beating with a wild excitement, I knew that I had stumbled upon the greatest discovery of the age. Here, upon this isolated plateau, cut off from the rest of the world for countless ages, the Mesozoic life of the earth had survived unchanged. I spent 2 days upon the plateau, hidden among the trees, observing what I could. I saw creatures that I can only describe as pterodactyls, great flying reptiles with wings 20 feet across. I saw the tracks of huge three-toed animals in the soft ground by the lakeside. Once, at a distance, I caught a glimpse of a monstrous shape moving among the trees, something bulky and erect, with a long neck and a small head. I dared not venture too far. My supplies were limited, and I had no wish to become a meal for these resurrected monsters. Reluctantly, I descended the cliff and made my way back to civilization, carrying with me the precious wing and a few photographs which I had managed to take. When I returned to London, I attempted to tell something of my experiences. The result, you know. I was met with ridicule and incredulity. My photographs were declared to be fakes. My specimen wing was pronounced to be that of a large bat or a mutilated bird. Even my scientific colleagues turned against me. So I withdrew into silence. I would waste no more words upon those who had neither the imagination to conceive nor the courage to believe. But the facts remain. The plateau is there. The creatures are there. And one day, the truth will be known. The professor sank back in his chair, his eyes gleaming under their heavy brows. For a moment the room was very still. Then he spoke again, more quietly. You, Mr. Malone, have forced your way into my confidence. You have given me your word of honor. I expect you to keep it. But I have told you this much because I see in you the possibility of a useful instrument. You are young, strong, and not entirely a fool. You have expressed a desire for adventure. Very well. I may have a use for you. What do you propose, Professor? I asked, my voice trembling with excitement. He smiled, a slow, massive smile. In 3 weeks' time, I intend to lead a small expedition back to the Amazon. My object is to explore and map this lost world, to bring back undeniable proofs, and to establish my claims once and for all. I shall need companions, men of courage and resource. Lord John Roxton has already promised to join me. He is a sportsman and a traveller of some note. I have also in mind a young scientist named Summerlee, though he is at present one of my most bitter opponents. And now, Mr. Malone, I put it to you. Would you care to make a fourth? I sprang to my feet, my heart glowing within me as it had done that foggy November evening when I left Gladys. Professor, I cried, I would give anything in the world for such a chance. He held up his great hand. Do not be too hasty. The dangers will be very real. We may never return. But if you are willing, and if you can satisfy me that you are fit for the task, then the place is yours. And so it was that, on that memorable evening in Enmore Park, the die was cast. Little did I dream, as I walked back through the foggy streets with my head in a whirl, of the incredible adventures that lay before me, or of the strange and wonderful things I was destined to see in that lost world beyond the veil of the centuries. Chapter 6. I was the flail of the Lord. 3 weeks had passed since that memorable evening in Enmore Park. In the interval I had seen much of Professor Challenger. I had even dined at his house, where the little woman with the dark eyes had treated me with a charming mixture of suspicion and kindness, as one who might possibly corrupt her formidable husband. Twice I had met Lord John Roxton, the famous hunter and explorer, at the professor's invitation. He was a tall, thin man with a lined, ascetic face, a quiet voice, and the steadiest pair of steel-grey eyes that I have ever seen. There was something very reassuring in his cool, collected manner, and in the way he listened to the professor's more extravagant outbursts with a half-amused, half-admiring smile. The fourth member of our party was Professor Summerlee of the University of Edinburgh,
a dry, precise, elderly man with a thin, rasping voice and an everlasting habit of polishing his glasses. He and Challenger were old antagonists, and their meetings were always marked by a certain electric quality. Yet both men respected each other's brains, and the prospect of a joint expedition seemed to have drawn them into an armed truce. On the evening before our departure, we met for a final conference at Challenger's house. The great map of South America was spread out upon the table, and the professor's thick forefinger traced our proposed route up the Amazon and its unknown tributary. "Here," he boomed, "is the point where the river forks. We leave the main stream and strike up this smaller branch. For 3 days we shall be in fairly well-known country. Then we come to the rapids. Beyond that, the map is blank. That is where our real work begins." Summerlee adjusted his glasses and peered at the chart with academic skepticism. "3 weeks at great confidence, Challenger," he said in his dry voice. "But I confess I see no indication upon this map of the plateau you describe, nor do I find any record in the works of Wallace or Bates of such a remarkable formation." Challenger's beard bristled. "My dear Summerlee, if you will kindly confine your attention to those departments of science in which you are competent, we shall progress much more smoothly. The plateau exists. I have seen it. I have stood upon its edge. That should be sufficient even for a mind as cautious as yours." Lord John Roxton leaned back in his chair and laughed softly. Come, gentlemen," he drawled in his easy, aristocratic voice. "We shall have plenty of time for scientific discussion when we get there. For the present, the question is one of practical preparation. I have arranged for the stores, tinned meats, biscuits, condensed milk, quinine, rifles, ammunition, and all the rest. The canoe and the paddlers will be waiting for us at Manaus." The talk turned to details of equipment and route. I listened with a growing thrill of excitement. It seemed incredible that in a few days' time I should be setting out upon the greatest adventure of my life. At last Challenger rose from his chair, his massive figure towering above us. "Gentlemen," he said, "tomorrow we start upon an expedition which may prove to be the most important in the history of scientific exploration. We carry with us the honor of British science. I need hardly remind you that absolute loyalty and obedience will be required from every member of the party. There must be no dissension, no questioning of my leadership. Is that clearly understood?" Summerlee muttered something under his breath about dictatorship, but Lord John only smiled and nodded. "I am content," said he, "so long as the big game is worth the candle." As for me, I gave my promise gladly. Adventure was what I had craved, and here it was being offered to me in its most wonderful form. The next morning we met at the railway station. Mrs. Challenger was there to see her husband off. She clung to his arm with a mixture of pride and anxiety, while he patted her shoulder with one of his enormous hands and rumbled reassuringly. "Be good, Jessie," he said. "I shall be back before you know it, with such proofs as will make the whole world ring with the name of Challenger." "Take care of yourself, George," she whispered, "and don't quarrel with everyone." Then the guard's whistle blew, doors slammed, and the great train began to move. I leaned out of the window and waved to the little group upon the platform. As the station slid away behind us, I turned to find Challenger already deep in a scientific discussion with Summerlee, while Lord John Roxton contentedly filled his pipe. Thus we started upon our journey, the 4 of us, bound for the unknown. The long sea voyage to South America passed pleasantly enough. Challenger and Summerlee spent most of their time in heated but good-natured argument upon every subject, from the nature of the germplasm to the correct method of loading a rifle. Lord John proved an excellent companion, full of quiet stories of his African and Indian adventures. As for myself, I wrote long letters to the Gazette and dreamed nightly of the plateau and its wonders. At last we reached Para, and from there ascended the mighty Amazon. Day after day we steamed upstream through a world of green and gold, where the great river rolled its yellow flood between walls of impenetrable forest. The air was heavy with the scent of flowers and decaying vegetation. Parrots screamed overhead, and once we saw a great anaconda slide lazily from a branch into the water. At Manaus, we left the steamer and took to our canoe. Here our real journey began. For 3 days we paddled up the tributary, the forest growing ever denser and more mysterious around us. Then came the rapids, roaring and foaming over black rocks. We portaged our canoe and stores with much labor and pressed on into country where white men had never before set foot. On the evening of the 8th day, we camped upon a little sandy beach beside the river. The professor had been unusually silent all day. As we sat round our fire after supper, he suddenly spoke. "Gentlemen," he said, "tomorrow we should reach the point where the trail to the plateau begins. From now on, we must proceed with the greatest caution. The Indians are friendly enough in this region, but beyond the rapids there are tribes that have never seen a white man. Moreover, if my observations are correct, we are approaching the neighborhood of the plateau itself." Lord John knocked the ashes from his pipe. "Then we'd better double the watch tonight," he said quietly. "Better safe than sorry." I lay awake for a long time that night, listening to the strange cries of the jungle and the soft lapping of the river against the beach. The adventure had begun in earnest. Somewhere ahead of us, hidden behind its wall of cliffs, lay the lost world of which Challenger had spoken, the world of living dinosaurs and flying dragons. My heart beat fast at the thought. And so, with the jungle murmuring around us and the stars shining brightly overhead, we passed our last peaceful night before the great unknown claimed us for its own. Chapter 7. Tomorrow we disappear into the unknown. I will not bore those whom this narrative may reach by an account of our luxurious voyage upon the Booth liner, nor will I tell of our week's stay at Para, save that I should wish to acknowledge the great kindness of the Pereira de Pinta Company in helping us to get together our equipment. I will also allude very briefly to our river journey up a wide, slow-moving, clay-tinted stream in a steamer which was little smaller than that which had carried us across the Atlantic. Eventually, we found ourselves through the narrows of Obidos and reached the town of Manaus. Here we were rescued from the limited attractions of the local inn by Mr. Shortman, the representative of the British and Brazilian Trading Company. In his hospitable fazenda, we spent our time until the day when we were empowered to open the letter of instructions given to us by Professor Challenger. Before I reach the surprising events of that date, I would desire to give a clearer sketch of my comrades in this enterprise and of the associates whom we had already gathered together in South America. I speak freely, and I leave the use of my material to your own discretion, Mr. McArdle, since it is through your hands that this report must pass before it reaches the world. The scientific attainments of Professor Summerlee are too well known for me to trouble to recapitulate them. He is better equipped for a rough expedition of this sort than one would imagine at first sight. His tall, gaunt, stringy figure is insensible to fatigue, and his dry, half-sarcastic, and often wholly unsympathetic manner is uninfluenced by any change in his surroundings. Though in his 66th year, I have never heard him express any dissatisfaction at the occasional hardships which we have had to encounter. I had regarded his presence as an encumbrance to the expedition, but, as a matter of fact, I am now well convinced that his power of endurance is as great as my own. In temper, he is naturally acid and skeptical. From the beginning, he has never concealed his belief that Professor Challenger is an absolute fraud, that we are all embarked upon an absurd wild goose chase, and that we are likely to reap nothing but disappointment and danger in South America, and corresponding ridicule in England. Such are the views which,
With much passionate distortion of his thin features and wagging of his thin, goat-like beard, he poured into our ears all the way from Southampton to Manaus. Since landing from the boat, he has obtained some consolation from the beauty and variety of the insect and bird life around him, for he is absolutely wholehearted in his devotion to science. He spends his days flitting through the woods with his shotgun and his butterfly net, and his evenings in mounting the many specimens he has acquired. Among his minor peculiarities are that he is careless as to his attire, unclean in his person, exceedingly absent-minded in his habits, and addicted to smoking a short briar pipe, which is seldom out of his mouth. He has been upon several scientific expeditions in his youth. He was with Robertson in Papua, and the life of the camp and the canoe is nothing fresh to him. Lord John Roxton has some points in common with Professor Summerlee, and others in which they are the very antithesis to each other. He is 20 years younger, but has something of the same spare, scraggy physique. As to his appearance, I have, as I recollect, described it in that portion of my narrative which I have left behind me in London. He is exceedingly neat and prim in his ways, dresses always with great care in white drill suits and high brown mosquito boots, and shaves at least once a day. Like most men of action, he is laconic in speech, and sinks readily into his own thoughts, but he is always quick to answer a question or join in a conversation, talking in a queer, jerky, half-humorous fashion. His knowledge of the world, and very especially of South America, is surprising, and he has a wholehearted belief in the possibilities of our journey, which is not to be dashed by the sneers of Professor Summerlee. He has a gentle voice and a quiet manner, but behind his twinkling blue eyes there lurks a capacity for furious wrath and implacable resolution, the more dangerous because they are held in leash. He spoke little of his own exploits in Brazil and Peru, but it was a revelation to me to find the excitement which was caused by his presence among the riverine natives, who looked upon him as their champion and protector. The exploits of the Red Chief, as they called him, had become legends among them, but the real facts, as far as I could learn them, were amazing enough. These were that Lord John had found himself some years before in that no-man's land which is formed by the half-defined frontiers between Peru, Brazil, and Colombia. In this great district, the wild rubber tree flourishes and has become, as in the Congo, a curse to the natives which can only be compared to their forced labor under the Spaniards upon the old silver mines of Darien. A handful of villainous half-breeds dominated the country, armed such Indians as would support them, and turned the rest into slaves, terrorizing them with the most inhuman tortures in order to force them to gather the India rubber, which was then floated down the river to Para. Lord John Roxton expostulated on behalf of the wretched victims, and received nothing but threats and insults for his pains. He then formally declared war against Pedro Lopez, the leader of the slave drivers, enrolled a band of runaway slaves in his service, armed them, and conducted a campaign which ended by his killing with his own hands the notorious half-breed and breaking down the system which he represented. No wonder that the ginger-headed man with the silky voice and the free and easy manners was now looked upon with deep interest upon the banks of the great South American river, though the feelings he inspired were naturally mixed, since the gratitude of the natives was equalled by the resentment of those who desired to exploit them. One useful result of his former experiences was that he could talk fluently in the lingo geral, which is the peculiar talk, 1/3 Portuguese and 2/3 Indian, which is current all over Brazil. I have said before that Lord John Roxton was a South America maniac. He could not speak of that great country without ardor, and this ardor was infectious, for, ignorant as I was, he fixed my attention and stimulated my curiosity.
How I wish I could reproduce the glamour of his discourses, the peculiar mixture of accurate knowledge and of racy imagination which gave them their fascination, until even the professor's cynical and skeptical smile would gradually vanish from his thin face as he listened. He would tell the history of the mighty river so rapidly explored, for some of the first conquerors of Peru actually crossed the entire continent upon its waters, and yet so unknown in regard to all that lay behind its ever-changing banks. "What is there?" he would cry, pointing to the north. "Wood and marsh and unpenetrated jungle. Who knows what it may shelter? And there to the south, a wilderness of swampy forest where no white man has ever been. The unknown is up against us on every side. Outside the narrow lines of the rivers, what does anyone know? Who will say what is possible in such a country? Why should Old Man Challenger not be right?" At which direct defiance the stubborn sneer would reappear upon Professor Summerlee's face, and he would sit, shaking his sardonic head in unsympathetic silence, behind the cloud of his briar-root pipe. So much, for the moment, for my two white companions, whose characters and limitations will be further exposed as surely as my own as this narrative proceeds. But already we have enrolled certain retainers who may play no small part in what is to come. The first is a gigantic Negro named Zambo, who is a black Hercules, as willing as any horse, and about as intelligent. Him we enlisted at Para, on the recommendation of the steamship company, on whose vessels he had learned to speak a halting English. It was at Para also that we engaged Gomez and Manuel, two half-breeds from up the river, just come down with a cargo of redwood. They were swarthy fellows, bearded and fierce, as active and wiry as panthers. Both of them had spent their lives in those upper waters of the Amazon which we were about to explore, and it was this recommendation which had caused Lord John to engage them. One of them, Gomez, had the further advantage that he could speak excellent English. These men were willing to act as our personal servants, to cook, to row, or to make themselves useful in any way. The day came at last when we were to open the sealed envelope containing Professor Challenger's instructions. We gathered in the cool shade of the veranda, the great man's massive handwriting staring up at us from the paper. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. The directions were clear and precise. We were to proceed up a certain tributary, unnamed until we reached it, and then strike into the unknown. There, if his calculations were correct, we should find the base of the great cliffs. "Tomorrow," said Challenger's letter in its bold, commanding script, "you disappear into the unknown." We looked at one another in silence. Lord John smiled his quiet smile. Summerlee polished his glasses with a skeptical air, but in all our hearts there burned the same flame of adventure. The die was cast. The links with the outer world were about to be snapped. Ahead lay the dark forests, the towering cliffs, and beyond them, the lost world. That night, as I lay listening to the strange calls of the jungle, my thoughts turned once more to Gladys and the heroic deed I had set out to accomplish. Little did I know how far beyond my wildest dreams that deed would carry me. Tomorrow we disappear into the unknown. Chapter 8. The Outlying Pickets of the New World. Our friends at home may well have wondered at the slow drift of the days which passed while we remained in Manaus, but the truth is that we were not altogether idle. We were making our final preparations for the journey into the unknown, and every hour had its task. The stores which Lord John had so thoughtfully provided were carefully checked and repacked. Gomez and Manuel proved to be excellent servants, quick, willing, and thoroughly acquainted with the river life. Zambo, the huge Negro, was a tower of strength. carrying loads which would have staggered any ordinary man. At last, the day came when we were ready to start. Our canoes, 2 in number, lay at the water's edge, loaded with all that we should need for many weeks in the wilderness. The paddlers stood ready, sturdy half-breeds and Indians whom Lord John had chosen with care. We said goodbye to our kind host, Mr. Shortman, and pushed off into the great river. The current was strong, but our paddlers were expert, and we made good progress. For 2 days we followed the broad Amazon, a yellow flood stretching from horizon to horizon, with the dense green wall of the forest on either side. Then we turned into the narrower tributary of which Challenger had spoken. The stream grew narrower and swifter. The trees met overhead in many places, forming a green tunnel through which we glided. The air was heavy with the scent of flowers and damp vegetation. Bright birds flashed among the branches, and once a great butterfly, blue as a sapphire, hovered for a moment above our canoe. On the 3rd day, we reached the first of the rapids. Here we had to unload the canoes and carry everything over the portage. It was hard work under the blazing sun, but Zambo's strength and the cheerful energy of our men made light of it. That night we camped upon a little sandy islet in the middle of the river. As we sat round the fire, the professor unrolled his map and pointed out our position. "We are now," he said, "approaching the outlying pickets of the New World. Tomorrow we should reach the point where the trail to the plateau diverges from the river. From that time onward we shall be in country which no white man has ever traversed." Summerlee polished his glasses and peered at the map with his usual skepticism. "I see no indication here of any such plateau," he remarked dryly. Challenger's eyes flashed, but he controlled himself with an effort. "My dear Summerlee," he rumbled, "your vision is limited by the small scale of your mind. The plateau is there. I have seen it. In a few days you will see it also, if you have the courage to look." Lord John laughed softly and knocked out his pipe. "Well, gentlemen," he drawled, "whether the plateau is there or not, we are likely to have sport enough before we are through. I have been in wild country before, but never in any quite like this. Listen to it." We sat silent. From the dark forest all around us came a chorus of strange sounds, the hoarse roaring of howler monkeys, the shrill cries of parrots, the stealthy rustling of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, and, far away, a deep, coughing growl which made us glance uneasily at our rifles. "The outlying pickets," said Lord John quietly. "They are warning us that we are entering their domain." The next morning we pushed on again. The river grew narrower and more turbulent. Great trees leaned over the water, their roots twisted like serpents. Vines hung in festoons from branch to branch. The heat was intense, and the air was filled with the hum of insects. Toward midday we reached a place where the river divided. One branch flowed on to the west, but the other turned sharply to the south and disappeared into a dark gorge between high, wooded banks. Challenger stood up in the canoe, his great figure swaying with the motion. "This is the stream," he cried. "Follow it. This is the road to the plateau." We turned into the narrower channel. The current was stronger here, and our paddlers had to work hard. The forest seemed to close in upon us. The trees were taller and more densely interwoven. Strange flowers, scarlet and purple, glowed in the shadows. Once a brilliant macaw screamed overhead, its plumage flashing like a jewel. Once a brilliant macaw screamed overhead, its plum-like flashing like a jewel. Late in the afternoon we came to a broad, shallow stretch where the water ran swiftly over a bed of pebbles. Here we beached the canoes and prepared to camp for the night. As we sat eating our supper, the professor suddenly pointed toward the south. "Look!" he said in a low voice. We turned. Through a gap in the trees, far away against the evening sky, we saw a faint blue line. It was so distant and so dim that at first I took it for a cloud, but the professor's eyes were shining. "The cliffs," he whispered, "the cliffs of the lost world." My heart gave a great leap. There then was the goal of all our hopes and labors, the mysterious barrier behind which lay the wonders of which Challenger had told us. We sat long into the night talking in low voices, while the jungle murmured around us and the stars came out one by one above the dark trees. Tomorrow we should leave the river and strike into the unknown forest. Tomorrow the real adventure would begin. But that night, as I lay wrapped in my blanket listening to the breathing of my companions and the ceaseless voices of the wilderness, I felt a strange peace steal over me. Whatever dangers lay ahead, I was glad, deeply glad, that I had come. The outlying pickets had been passed. We stood upon the threshold of the new world. Chapter 9. Who could have foreseen it? The early morning light was filtering through the leaves as we broke camp and prepared to leave the river behind us. The air was fresh and cool, filled with the scent of damp earth and flowering vines. Birds were beginning to call from the treetops, and a faint mist still hung over the water. We loaded our packs, took up our rifles, and struck southward into the forest, following a faint game trail that the professor assured us would lead toward the base of the cliffs. The going was not easy. The undergrowth was thick, and tangled vines caught at our feet and clothing. Great trees towered above us, their trunks draped with creepers and orchids. Sunlight slanted down in golden shafts where the canopy thinned, but for the most part we moved in a cool, green twilight. Zambo and the other bearers marched steadily behind us, their loads balanced upon their heads. Gomez and Manuel went ahead with machetes, clearing the worst of the obstructing growth. Lord John walked lightly in the lead, his rifle ready, his keen eyes scanning the shadows on either side. Professor Summerlee followed, stopping now and then to examine some insect or flower with his magnifying glass. Challenger brought up the rear, his massive figure forcing its way through the bush like a tank, his great beard thrust forward and his eyes gleaming with excitement. I came between Summerlee and Challenger, my own pack heavy upon my shoulders, but my heart lighter than it had been for many a day. This was the life I had dreamed of, the real adventure at last. For several hours we pushed on without incident. The trail grew steeper as we began to climb the lower slopes that led up toward the plateau. The air became cooler and the vegetation changed. Fewer palms and more conifers appeared. The ground was firmer underfoot. Toward midday, we halted in a small clearing beside a bubbling spring. We ate a light meal of tinned meat and biscuits and drank gratefully of the clear, cold water. While we rested, Lord John wandered off a little way to reconnoiter. He returned presently with a grave face. "I don't like the look of it," he said quietly. "There are fresh tracks here, big tracks. Something heavy has been moving about. And look at this." He held out a broken twig. The end was smeared with something dark and sticky. "Blood," said Challenger, examining it. "Fresh blood. Some creature has been killed here quite recently." Summerlee peered at the twig through his glasses. "It might be anything," he remarked dryly. "A tapir, perhaps, or a deer." "Or something larger," said Lord John. "Much larger. I found this also." He produced a fragment of bone, freshly gnawed. It was thick and heavy, unlike any bone I had ever seen. Challenger took it in his enormous hand and turned it over with keen interest. "Interesting, very interesting," he rumbled. "The femur of some large reptile, I should say. The tooth marks are remarkable. See the depth and width of the grooves. This was no ordinary carnivore. We looked at one another in silence. The peaceful forest suddenly seemed full of hidden menace. "We had better push on," said Lord John. "I don't fancy camping here tonight." We resumed our march, more cautiously now. The trail continued to climb. The trees grew thinner in places, and through the gaps we caught occasional glimpses of the distant blue line of the cliffs, much nearer than before. They rose sheer and formidable against the sky, crowned with mist. Toward evening, we came to a broader clearing, where a small stream ran through a bed of ferns. Here, we decided to camp. While the men pitched the tents and lit the fire, Lord John and I went out to gather firewood. We had not gone far when a sudden crashing in the undergrowth made us stop short. Something large was moving toward us. Lord John motioned me to stand still and raised his rifle. Out of the bushes burst a creature such as I had never seen before. It was about the size of a large horse, with a long, sinuous neck and a small, snake-like head. Its skin was dull green, mottled with darker patches. It moved upon powerful hind legs, balancing itself with a heavy tail. For a moment it stood staring at us with cold, reptilian eyes. Then, with a harsh hiss, it turned and crashed away into the forest. Lord John lowered his rifle slowly. "Well, I'm blowed," he said softly. "If that wasn't a young iguanodon or something very like it, then I've never seen a beast in my life." We hurried back to camp and told the others. Challenger's eyes blazed with triumph. "What did I tell you?" he cried. "The outlying pickets have spoken. We are on the very edge of the lost world. Tomorrow, perhaps even tonight, we may stand at the foot of the cliffs themselves." Summerlee said nothing, but for once his skeptical smile was absent. He polished his glasses with unusual care and stared thoughtfully into the gathering darkness. That night the jungle seemed unusually restless. Strange cries echoed through the trees, deep bellowings, shrill screams, and once a long, trumpeting call that made the hair rise on the back of my neck. We doubled the watch, and no one slept very soundly. Who could have foreseen what the morning would bring? Who could have dreamed of the strange and terrible events that were so soon to overtake us? As I lay awake, listening to the breathing of my companions and the ceaseless murmur of the wilderness, I thought once more of Gladys and the heroic deed I had promised myself. How far away and how small it all seemed now, compared with the vast mystery that surrounded us. Tomorrow we should reach the cliffs. Tomorrow the lost world would open its gates or close them upon us forever. Who could have foreseen it? Chapter 10. The most wonderful things have happened. The first pale light of dawn found us already astir. There was a strange hush over the camp. Even the jungle seemed to be holding its breath. We ate a hurried breakfast, packed our kits with unusual care, and set off once more toward the south. The ground rose steadily. The trees grew thinner and the undergrowth less dense. Soon we were climbing a long, grassy slope, dotted with clumps of bamboo and occasional giant tree ferns. The air was cooler and fresher, with a faint breeze blowing down from the heights above. By midday, we had reached the base of the great cliffs. They towered above us like the walls of some enormous fortress, black and forbidding, streaked here and there with patches of green where moss and creepers had found a foothold. We craned our necks, but the top was lost in a veil of mist that hung like a curtain across the sky. Challenger stood with his hands upon his hips, his massive head thrown back, gazing upward with an expression of triumph and reverence. "There it is," he said in a low, reverent voice, "the barrier that has guarded its secret for countless ages. Behind that wall lies a fragment of the world's youth, a lost world preserved as if in amber. Lord John walked slowly along the foot of the cliff, examining the rock with a practiced eye. "It's basalt," he said, "sheer and smooth for the most part, but there may be a break somewhere. We must search for a way up." We divided into two parties and began to explore the base of the cliffs, keeping within call of each other. For hours we toiled along the rocky talus, pushing through thorny scrub and clambering over fallen boulders. The heat was intense in the sheltered spots, and the glare from the rock hurt our eyes. It was late in the afternoon when a shout from Lord John brought us all hurrying to his side. He was standing at the mouth of a narrow gorge where a small stream tumbled down in a series of cascades. "This looks promising," he said. "The water has worn a channel. If we're lucky, it may lead right up to the top." We followed the gorge for some distance. The walls closed in until we were walking in a deep, shadowy ravine. The stream grew smaller and the climb steeper. At last, we came to a place where the water fell in a thin veil from a height of 30 or 40 feet. Above the fall, the rock seemed broken and irregular. Challenger's eyes were shining. "This is the way," he declared. "I am certain of it. We can camp here tonight and make the ascent in the morning." We pitched our tents on a small ledge beside the stream. As darkness fell, we sat round the fire and talked in low voices. The professor was in an expansive mood and told us many stories of his previous visit, how he had climbed the cliffs alone, what he had seen upon the plateau, and how narrowly he had escaped with his life. Suddenly, from far above us, there came a strange sound, a long, harsh cry that echoed down the gorge like the scream of some gigantic bird. It was answered by another, and then another, until the night seemed filled with wild, unearthly voices. We sat silent, listening. Lord John quietly slipped cartridges into his rifle. "Pterodactyls," said Challenger softly. "They are coming down to the water to drink. We are very close now, very close indeed." I could not sleep that night. I lay awake for hours, staring up at the narrow strip of starlit sky between the walls of the gorge. The strange cries continued at intervals, sometimes near, sometimes far away. Once I thought I heard the heavy tread of some great creature moving along the top of the cliff. Who could have foreseen the events of the next few days? Who could have imagined the wonders and the terrors that awaited us when we should set foot upon that mysterious plateau? The most wonderful things have happened since I began this narrative. I little thought, when I started upon my modest journalistic enterprise, that it would lead me into scenes so strange and so marvelous. But I must not anticipate. Let me tell the story as it unfolded, step by step, exactly as it occurred. The next morning we rose early and prepared for the ascent. The climb was difficult and dangerous. More than once we had to help one another up steep faces of rock where a single slip would have meant certain death. Zambo and the half-breeds proved invaluable, their strong arms and sure feet making light of obstacles that would have stopped us. At last, after hours of exhausting labor, we reached a broad ledge some 200 feet below the summit. Here we rested, panting and sweating, our hands torn and bleeding from the sharp rock. Challenger was the first to recover. He climbed a little higher and peered over a jutting crag. For a moment he stood motionless. Then he turned to us, his face transfigured with joy. "Come," he cried, in a voice that trembled with emotion. "Come and see. The lost world lies before us." One by one we scrambled up beside him and looked out. Spread beneath us was a vast tableland, stretching away for miles. Dense forests clothed the lower slopes, while open glades and shining lakes gleamed in the distance. But it was not the landscape alone that held us spellbound. High in the air above the trees floated several dark shapes, great winged creatures with leathery membranes stretched between long, bony fingers. Even as we watched, one of them swooped downward with a harsh cry and disappeared among the treetops. Far away across the plateau, a column of smoke rose slowly into the still air, and once, dimly through the haze, I thought I saw a huge, erect figure moving among the trees, something that walked like a man, but was far larger than any man. We stood there in silence, awed and humbled by the sight. The lost world had opened its gates at last. The most wonderful things have happened, and yet, as I write these words by the light of our campfire upon the edge of this strange new world, I know that the greatest wonders and the greatest dangers still lie before us. Chapter 11. For once I was the hero. Lord John Roxton was right when he thought that some specially toxic quality might lie in the bite of the horrible creatures which had attacked us. On the morning after our first adventure upon the plateau, both Summerlee and I were in great pain and fever, while Challenger's knee was so bruised that he could hardly limp. We kept to our camp all day, therefore, Lord John busying himself, with such help as we could give him, in raising the height and thickness of the thorny walls which were our only defence. I remember that during the whole long day I was haunted by the feeling that we were closely observed, though by whom or whence I could give no guess. So strong was the impression that I told Professor Challenger of it, who put it down to the cerebral excitement caused by my fever. Again and again I glanced round swiftly with the conviction that I was about to see something, but only to meet the dark tangle of our hedge or the solemn and cavernous gloom of the great trees which arched above our heads. And yet the feeling grew ever stronger in my own mind that something observant and something malevolent was at our very elbow. I thought of the Indian superstition of the Kurupuri, the dreadful, lurking spirit of the woods, and I could have imagined that his terrible presence haunted those who had invaded his most remote and sacred retreat. That night, our third in Maple White Land, we had an experience which left a fearful impression upon our minds and made us thankful that Lord John had worked so hard in making our retreat impregnable. We were all sleeping round our dying fire when we were aroused, or rather, I should say, shot out of our slumbers, by a succession of the most frightful cries and screams to which I have ever listened. I know no sound to which I could compare this amazing tumult, which seemed to come from some spot within a few 100 yards of our camp. It was as ear-splitting as any whistle of a railway engine, but whereas the whistle is a clear, mechanical, sharp-edged sound, this was far deeper in volume and vibrant with the uttermost strain of agony and horror. We clapped our hands to our ears to shut out that nerve-shaking appeal. A cold sweat broke out over my body, and my heart turned sick at the misery of it. All the woes of tortured life, all its stupendous indictment of high heaven, its innumerable sorrows seemed to be centered and condensed into that one dreadful, agonized cry. And then, under this high-pitched, ringing sound, there was another, more intermittent, a low, deep-chested laugh, a growling, throaty gurgle of merriment which formed a grotesque accompaniment to the shriek with which it was blended. For 3 or 4 minutes on end the fearsome duet continued, while all the foliage rustled with the rising of startled birds. Then it shut off as suddenly as it began. For a long time we sat in horrified silence. Then Lord John threw a bundle of twigs upon the fire, and their red glare lit up the intent faces of my companions and flickered over the great boughs above our heads. "What was it?" I whispered. "We shall know in the morning," said Lord John. "It was close to us, not farther than the glade. We have been privileged to overhear a prehistoric tragedy, the sort of drama which occurred among the reeds upon the border of some Jurassic lagoon, when the greater dragon pinned the lesser among the slime, said Challenger, with more solemnity than I had ever heard in his voice. It was surely well for man that he came late in the order of creation. There were powers abroad in earlier days which no courage and no mechanism of his could have met. I think I should back my little friend, said Lord John, caressing his express. But the beast would certainly have a good sporting chance. Summerlee raised his hand. Hush, he cried. Surely I hear something. From the utter silence there emerged a deep, regular pat-pat. It was the tread of some animal, the rhythm of soft but heavy pads placed cautiously upon the ground. It stole slowly round the camp, and then halted near our gateway. There was a low, sibilant rise and fall, the breathing of the creature. Only our feeble hedge separated us from this horror of the night. Each of us had seized his rifle, and Lord John had pulled out a small bush to make an embrasure in the hedge. By George, he whispered, I think I can see it. I stooped and peered over his shoulder through the gap. Yes, I could see it too. In the deep shadow of the tree there was a deeper shadow yet, black, inchoate, vague, a crouching form full of savage vigor and menace. It was no higher than a horse, but the dim outline suggested vast bulk and strength. That hissing pant, as regular and full-volumed as the exhaust of an engine, spoke of a monstrous organism. Once, as it moved, I thought I saw the glint of two terrible greenish eyes. There was an uneasy rustling, as if it were crawling slowly forward. I believe it is going to spring, said I, cocking my rifle. Don't fire, whispered Lord John. The crash of a gun in this silent night would be heard for miles. Keep it as a last card. If it gets over the hedge, we're done, said Summerlee, and his voice crackled into a nervous laugh as he spoke. No, it must not get over, cried Lord John, but hold your fire to the last. Perhaps I can make something of the fellow. I'll chance it anyhow. It was as brave an act as ever I saw a man do. He stooped to the fire, picked up a blazing branch, and slipped in an instant through a sallyport which he had made in our gateway. The thing moved forward with a dreadful snarl. Lord John never hesitated, but running towards it with a quick, light step, he dashed the flaming wood into the brute's face. For one moment I had a vision of a horrible mask like a giant toad's, of a warty, leprous skin, and of a loose mouth all beslobbered with fresh blood. The next, there was a crash in the underwood, and our dreadful visitor was gone. I thought he wouldn't face the fire, said Lord John, laughing, as he came back and threw his branch among the faggots. You should not have taken such a risk, we all cried. There was nothing else to be done. If he had got among us, we should have shot each other in trying to down him. On the other hand, if we had fired through the hedge and wounded him, he would soon have been on the top of us, to say nothing of giving ourselves away. On the whole, I think that we are jolly well out of it. What was he, then? Our learned men looked at each other with some hesitation. Personally, I am unable to classify the creature with any certainty, said Summerlee, lighting his pipe from the fire. In refusing to commit yourself, you are but showing a proper scientific reserve, said Challenger with massive condescension. I am not myself prepared to go farther than to say in general terms that we have almost certainly been in contact tonight with some form of carnivorous dinosaur. We have to bear in mind, remarked Summerlee, that there are many prehistoric forms which have never come down to us. It would be rash to suppose that we can give a name to all that we are likely to meet. Exactly. A rough classification may be the best that we can attempt. Tomorrow, some further evidence may help us to an identification. Meantime, we can only renew our interrupted slumbers. But not without a sentinel, said Lord John with decision. We can't afford to take chances in a country like this. 2 hour spells in the future, for each of us. Then I'll just finish my pipe in starting the first one, said Professor Summerlee. And from that time onwards, we never trusted ourselves again without a watchman. In the morning, it was not long before we discovered the source of the hideous uproar which had aroused us in the night. The iguanodon glade was the scene of a horrible butchery. From the pools of blood and the enormous lumps of flesh scattered in every direction over the green sward, we imagined at first that a number of animals had been killed. But on examining the remains more closely, we discovered that all this carnage came from one of these unwieldy monsters, which had been literally torn to pieces by some creature not larger, perhaps, but far more ferocious than itself. Our two professors sat in absorbed argument, examining piece after piece, which showed the marks of savage teeth and of enormous claws. "Our judgment must still be in abeyance," said Professor Challenger, with a huge slab of whitish-colored flesh across his knee. "The indications would be consistent with the presence of a saber-toothed tiger, such as are still found among the breccia of our caverns. But the creature actually seen was undoubtedly of a larger and more reptilian character. Personally, I should pronounce for Allosaurus." "Or Megalosaurus," said Summerlee. "More exactly. Any one of the larger carnivorous dinosaurs would meet the case. Among them are to be found all the most terrible types of animal life that have ever cursed the earth or blessed a museum." He laughed sonorously at his own conceit, for, though he had little sense of humor, the crudest pleasantry from his own lips moved him always to roars of appreciation. "The less noise the better," said Lord Roxton curtly. "We don't know who or what may be near us. If this fella comes back for his breakfast and catches us here, we won't have so much to laugh at. By the way, what is this mark upon the iguanodon's skull which you can touch?" the returned others said. "Some other more line the skin of the hero. There was a singular black circle of some substance which looked like asphalt." None of us could suggest what it meant, though Summerlee was of opinion that he had seen something similar upon one of the young ones 2 days before. Challenger said nothing, but looked pompous and puffy, as if he could, if he would, so that finally Lord John asked his opinion direct. "If your lordship will graciously permit me to open my mouth, I shall be happy to express my sentiments," said he, with elaborate sarcasm. "I am not in the habit of being taken to task in the fashion which seems to be customary with your lordship. I was not aware that it was necessary to ask your permission before smiling at a harmless pleasantry." It was not until he had received his apology that our touchy friend would suffer himself to be appeased. When at last his ruffled feelings were at ease, he addressed us at some length from his seat upon a fallen tree, speaking, as his habit was, as if he were imparting most precious information to a class of 1,000. "With regard to the marking," said he, "I am inclined to agree with my friend and colleague, Professor Summerlee, that the stains are from asphalt. As this plateau is in its very nature highly volcanic, and as asphalt is a substance which one associates with plutonic forces, I cannot doubt that it exists in the free liquid state, and that the creatures may have come in contact with it. A much more important problem is the question as to the existence of the carnivorous monster which has left its traces in this glade. We know roughly that this plateau is not larger than an average English county. Within this confined space, a certain number of creatures, mostly types which have passed away in the world below, have lived together for innumerable years. Now, it is very clear to me that in so long a period one would have expected that the carnivorous creatures, multiplying unchecked, would have exhausted their food supply and have been compelled to either modify their flesh-eating habits or die of hunger. This, we see, has not been so. We can only imagine, therefore, that the balance of nature is preserved by some check which limits the numbers of these ferocious creatures. One of the many interesting problems, therefore, which await our solution is to discover what that check may be and how it operates. I venture to trust that we may have some future opportunity for the closer study of the carnivorous dinosaurs. And I venture to trust we may not, I observed. The professor only raised his great eyebrows, as the schoolmaster meets the irrelevant observation of the naughty boy. Perhaps Professor Summerlee may have an observation to make, he said, and the two savants ascended together into some rarefied scientific atmosphere where the possibilities of a modification of the birth rate were weighed against the decline of the food supply as a check in the struggle for existence. That morning we mapped out a small portion of the plateau, avoiding the swamp of the pterodactyls and keeping to the east of our brook instead of to the west. In that direction, the country was still thickly wooded, with so much undergrowth that our progress was very slow. That evening, by the light of the fire and of a single candle, the first map of the lost world was elaborated. Every detail which I had roughly noted from my watchtower was drawn out in its relative place. Challenger's pencil hovered over the great blank which marked the lake. "What shall we call it?" he asked. "Why should you not take the chance of perpetuating your own name?" And so it became Lake Challenger upon the map. The full chapter continues with further exploration, the discovery of the ape-men, and Malone's heroic moment defending the camp, culminating in his proud reflection that for once he was the hero. And so, with the stars shining down upon our little thorn fortress in this strange lost world, I felt a quiet pride steal over me. For once, in the face of danger, I had played my part worthily. The adventures were only beginning, but that night I slept the sleep of one who'd earned his rest. Chapter 12. It was dreadful in the forest. I have said, or perhaps I have not said, for my memory plays me sad tricks these days, that I glowed with pride when 3 such men as my comrades thanked me for having saved, or at least greatly helped, the situation. As the youngster of the party, not merely in years, but in experience, character, knowledge, and all that goes to make a man, I had been overshadowed from the first, and now I was coming into my own. I warmed at the thought. Alas, for the pride which goes before a fall. That little glow of self-satisfaction, that added measure of self-confidence, were to lead me on that very night to the most dreadful experience of my life, ending with a shock which turns my heart sick when I think of it. It came about in this way. I had been unduly excited by the adventure of the tree, and sleep seemed to be impossible. Summerlee was on guard, sitting hunched over our small fire, a quaint, angular figure, his rifle across his knees, and his pointed, goat-like beard wagging with each weary nod of his head. Lord John lay silent, wrapped in the South American poncho which he wore, while Challenger snored with a roll and rattle which reverberated through the woods. The full moon was shining brightly, and the air was crisply cold. What a night for a walk! And then suddenly came the thought, why not? Suppose I stole softly away. Suppose I made my way down to the central lake. Suppose I was back at breakfast with some record of the place. Would I not in that case be thought an even more worthy associate? Then, if Summerlee carried the day and some means of escape were found, we should return to London with first-hand knowledge of the central mystery of the plateau, to which I alone, of all men, would have penetrated. I thought of Gladys, with her, "There are heroisms all round us." I seemed to hear her voice as she said it. I thought also of McArdle. What a 3-column article for the paper! What a foundation for a career! I clutched at a gun. My pockets were full of cartridges, and parting the thorn bushes at the gate of our zareba, quickly slipped out. My last glance showed me the unconscious Summerlee, most futile of sentinels, still nodding away like a queer mechanical toy in front of the smouldering fire. I had not gone 100 yards before I deeply repented my rashness. I may have said somewhere in this chronicle that I am too imaginative to be a really courageous man, but that I have an overpowering fear of seeming afraid. This was the power which now carried me onwards. I simply could not slink back with nothing done. Even if my comrades should not have missed me, and should never know of my weakness, there would still remain some intolerable self-shame in my own soul. And yet I shuddered at the position in which I found myself, and would have given all I possessed at that moment to have been honourably free of the whole business. It was dreadful in the forest. The trees grew so thickly, and their foliage spread so widely, that I could see nothing of the moonlight save that here and there the high branches made a tangled filigree against the starry sky. As the eyes became more used to the obscurity, one learned that there were different degrees of darkness among the trees, that some were dimly visible, while between and among them there were coal-black shadowed patches, like the mouths of caves, from which I shrank in horror as I passed. I thought of the despairing yell of the tortured iguanodon, that dreadful cry which had echoed through the woods. I thought, too, of the glimpse I had in the light of Lord John's torch of that bloated, warty, blood-slavering muzzle. Even now I was on its hunting ground. At any instant it might spring upon me from the shadows, this nameless and horrible monster. I stopped, and picking a cartridge from my pocket, I opened the breech of my gun. As I touched the lever, my heart leaped within me. It was the shotgun, not the rifle, which I had taken. Again the impulse to return swept over me. Here, surely, was a most excellent reason for my failure, one for which no one would think the less of me. But again the foolish pride fought against that very word. I could not, must not, fail. After a little hesitation, then, I screwed up my courage and continued upon my way, my useless gun under my arm. The darkness of the forest had been alarming, but even worse was the white, still flood of moonlight in the open glade of the iguanodons. Hid among the bushes, I looked out at it. None of the great brutes were in sight. Perhaps the tragedy which had befallen one of them had driven them from their feeding ground. In the misty, silvery night, I could see no sign of any living thing. Taking courage, therefore, I slipped rapidly across it, and among the jungle on the farther side I picked up once again the brook which was my guide. It was a cheery companion, gurgling and chuckling as it ran, like the dear old trout stream in the West Country where I have fished at night in my boyhood. As one descended the slope, the woods became thinner, and bushes, with occasional high trees, took the place of the forest. I could make good progress, therefore, and I could see without being seen. I passed close to the pterodactyl swamp, and as I did so, with a dry, crisp, leathery rattle of wings, one of these great creatures, it was 20 feet at least from tip to tip, rose up from somewhere near me and soared into the air. As it passed across the face of the moon, the light shone clearly through the membranous wings, and it looked like a flying skeleton against the white tropical radiance. I crouched low among the bushes, for I knew from past experience that with a single cry the creature could bring 100 of its loathsome mates about my ears. It was not until it had settled again that I dared to steal onwards upon my journey. The night had been exceedingly still, but as I advanced I became conscious of a low, rumbling sound, a continuous murmur somewhere in front of me. This grew louder as I proceeded, until at last it was clearly quite close to me. When I stood still, the sound was constant, so that it seemed to come from some stationary cause. It was like a boiling kettle or the bubbling of some great pot. Soon I came upon the source of it, for in the center of a small clearing I found a lake, or a pool, rather, for it was not larger than the basin of the Trafalgar Square fountain, of some black, pitch-like stuff, the surface of which rose and fell in great blisters of bursting gas. The air above it was shimmering with heat, and the ground round was so hot that I could hardly bear to lay my hand on it. It was clear that the great volcanic outburst which had raised this strange plateau so many years ago had not yet entirely spent its forces.
Blackened rocks and mounds of lava I had already seen everywhere, peeping out from amid the luxuriant vegetation which draped them. But this asphalt pool in the jungle was the first sign that we had of actual existing activity on the slopes of the ancient crater. I had no time to examine it further, for I had need to hurry if I were to be back in camp in the morning. It was a fearsome walk, and one which will be with me so long as memory holds. In the great moonlight clearings, I slunk along among the shadows on the margin. In the jungle, I crept forward, stopping with a beating heart whenever I heard, as I often did, the crash of breaking branches as some wild beast went past. Now and then, great shadows loomed up for an instant and were gone. Great, silent shadows which seemed to prowl upon padded feet. How often I stopped with the intention of returning, and yet every time my pride conquered my fear and sent me on again until my object should be attained. At last, my watch showed that it was 1 in the morning. I saw the gleam of water amid the openings of the jungle, and 10 minutes later I was among the reeds upon the borders of the central lake. I was exceedingly dry, so I lay down and took a long draught of its waters, which were fresh and cold. There was a broad pathway with many tracks upon it at the spot which I had found, so that it was clearly one of the drinking places of the animals. Close to the water's edge, there was a huge isolated block of lava. Up this I climbed, and lying on the top, I had an excellent view in every direction. The first thing which I saw filled me with amazement. When I described the view from the summit of the great tree, I said that on the farther cliff I could see a number of dark spots, which appeared to be the mouths of caves. Now, as I looked up at the same cliffs, I saw discs of light in every direction, ruddy, clearly defined patches, like the portholes of a liner in the darkness. For a moment I thought it was the lava glow from some volcanic action, but this could not be so. Any volcanic action would surely be down in the hollow and not high among the rocks. What, then, was the alternative? It was wonderful, and yet it must surely be. These ruddy spots must be the reflection of fires within the caves, fires which could only be lit by the hand of man. There were human beings, then, upon the plateau. How gloriously my expedition was justified. Here was news indeed for us to bear back with us to London. For a long time I lay and watched these red, quivering blotches of light. I suppose they were 10 miles off from me, yet even at that distance one could observe how, from time to time, they twinkled or were obscured as someone passed before them. What would I not have given to be able to crawl up to them, to peep in, and to take back some word to my comrades as to the appearance and character of the race who lived in so strange a place? It was out of the question for the moment, and yet surely we could not leave the plateau until we had some definite knowledge upon the point. Lake Gladys, my own lake, lay like a sheet of quicksilver before me, with a reflected moon shining brightly in the center of it. It was shallow, for in many places I saw low sandbanks protruding above the water. Everywhere upon the still surface I could see signs of life, sometimes mere rings and ripples in the water, sometimes the gleam of a great silver-sided fish in the air, sometimes the arched, slate-colored back of some passing monster. Once upon a yellow sandbank I saw a creature like a huge swan, with a clumsy body and a high, flexible neck, shuffling about upon the margin. Presently it plunged in, and for some time I could see the arched neck and darting head undulating over the water. Then it dived, and I saw it no more. My attention was soon drawn away from these distant sights and brought back to what was going on at my very feet. 2 creatures like large armadillos had come down to the drinking place and were squatting at the edge of the water, their long, flexible tongues like red ribbons shooting in and out as they lapped. A huge deer
With branching horns, a magnificent creature which carried itself like a king, came down with its doe and 2 fawns and drank beside the armadillos. No such deer exist anywhere else upon earth, for the moose or elks which I have seen would hardly have reached its shoulders. Presently, it gave a warning snort, and was off with its family among the reeds, while the armadillos also scuttled for shelter. A newcomer, a most monstrous animal, was coming down the path. For a moment, I wondered where I could have seen that ungainly shape, that arched back with triangular fringes along it, that strange bird-like head held close to the ground. Then it came back to me. It was the Stegosaurus, the very creature which Maple White had preserved in his sketchbook, and which had been the first object which arrested the attention of Challenger. There he was, perhaps the very specimen which the American artist had encountered. The ground shook beneath his tremendous weight, and his gulpings of water resounded through the still night. For 5 minutes he was so close to my rock that by stretching out my hand I could have touched the hideous waving hackles upon his back. Then he lumbered away and was lost among the boulders. Looking out over the moonlit lake, I could see many other creatures. Great shapes moved in the water. Once a colossal bulk rose for a moment and sank again with a mighty splash. It was a wonderful sight, but my nerves were all on edge, and I was glad when at last the time came for me to retrace my steps. I had turned to go when my eye caught something which held me as if by a spell. On the farther shore of the lake, half hidden among the reeds, a strange dark figure was standing, quite still. It was the figure of a man, tall, erect, and motionless. For a long minute he stood there, gazing out over the water. Then he turned and disappeared among the trees. Human beings upon the plateau. The thought sent a thrill through me, but it was time to return. With a last look at the wonderful scene, I began my homeward journey. It was on the return that the real horror of the night overtook me. I had reached the glade of the iguanodons and was crossing it swiftly when a sound behind me made me turn. There, not 50 paces away, crouched the most terrible creature I had ever seen, an enormous carnivorous dinosaur, its huge jaws dripping with blood, its terrible eyes gleaming in the moonlight. I stood frozen. The creature saw me and came bounding forward with incredible speed. I ran for my life toward the thorn zareba, but the monster was gaining rapidly. In my terror, I tripped and fell. I felt its hot breath upon me. Then came a crash, a roar, and darkness. When I recovered my senses, I was back in camp, my comrades bending over me. Lord John had heard my cry and had come to my rescue just in time, driving the creature off with well-aimed shots. It was dreadful in the forest, but I had seen the central lake, the fires of the cave dwellers, and the wonders of the lost world, and for that, even the terror had been worth enduring. Chapter 13. A sight which I shall never forget. Just as the sun was setting upon that memorable evening, I saw the lonely figure of the ape-man sitting upon the pinnacle of rock, his huge shoulders hunched and his head sunk upon his hands, while the stars in the heavens and the lights in the camp below seemed to mock his desolation. I had returned from my nocturnal adventure with the central lake, shaken in body and mind, and had been received by my comrades with a mixture of relief and reproof. But the events of the night were soon to be overshadowed by a far greater wonder. The morning broke bright and clear. We were all astir early, for the professor was determined to explore further and to obtain, if possible, some definite evidence which should convince even the skeptical Summerlee. We had breakfasted and were preparing to set forth when a strange thing happened. From the edge of the plateau, not far from our thorn zareba, there came a succession of loud, shrill cries, cries which seemed to be full of human agony and despair. "Good heavens!" cried Lord John. "What is that?" We rushed to the edge of the clearing. There, upon a rocky promontory which jutted out from the cliff, we saw a sight which I shall never forget to my dying day. Upon the summit of a great isolated rock, some distance from the main cliff, stood a gigantic ape-like creature, far larger than any of the others we had seen. It was beating its breast with its huge hands and uttering those dreadful cries which had drawn us to the spot. But it was not alone. Clinging to its side, and evidently in the last extremity of terror, was a small, human-like figure, a woman of the ape people, with a baby in her arms. Even as we looked, a number of the smaller ape men appeared upon the cliff behind, howling and gesticulating. They were driving the great creature and its burden toward the edge. "By George!" cried Lord John. "It's a drama of the Stone Age. They're going to hurl them over." The great ape man turned at bay. With one arm he held the woman and child, while with the other he fought desperately against his pursuers. For a few moments the issue was in doubt. Then, with a roar of rage, the giant seized one of his assailants and dashed him against the rock. But the numbers were too great. Slowly, step by step, the fugitives were forced backward toward the sheer precipice. "We must save them," I cried. "Too late, young fella," said Lord John. "Look!" With a last despairing cry, the great creature reached the edge. For an instant it stood outlined against the sky, the woman and child clasped to its breast. Then it sprang far out into the abyss. For a moment the three figures hung in mid-air. Then they vanished into the depths below. We stood in horrified silence. Even Challenger was awed. Summerlee wiped his glasses with a trembling hand. "A sight I shall never forget," I whispered. "The tragedy of a lost world." But the drama was not yet over. From the cliff above came a chorus of triumphant howls. The ape-men danced and capered in their victory. Then, to our amazement, one of them, a huge brute with a shock of red hair, began to descend the cliff toward our camp, swinging from ledge to ledge with incredible agility. "He's coming for us," cried Summerlee. Lord John raised his rifle. "I'll drop him if he comes too close," he said quietly. But the creature had no hostile intent. It reached a broad ledge not far above us and stood there, beating its breast and uttering strange guttural cries. Then it pointed downward to where the bodies had fallen and back toward the plateau. It seemed to be trying to tell us something. Challenger was in a state of high excitement. "A missing link," he boomed. "A veritable missing link. Here is the opportunity of a lifetime." For some minutes the great red ape-man stood regarding us. Then, with a final gesture, it turned and swung rapidly back up the cliff to rejoin its fellows. We returned to camp in a thoughtful mood. The tragedy we had witnessed had shown us the savage nature of this strange land, but it had also shown us that the ape-men were not the only inhabitants. There were human beings upon the plateau, perhaps the cave-dwellers whose fires I had seen across the lake. That evening, as we sat round the fire, Challenger outlined a bold plan. We must find a way to the caves. We must establish communication with the human race of Maple White Land. The wonders we had seen were but the prelude to greater discoveries. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice deep with emotion, "we stand upon the threshold of the unknown. What we have experienced today is but a glimpse. The full revelation is yet to come." I thought of Gladys and my quest for a heroic deed. How small and personal it seemed now beside the great drama unfolding around us. That night, As I lay looking up at the stars above the lost world, I knew that my life had been changed forever. A sight I shall never forget, and adventures yet more marvelous were waiting just beyond the dawn. Chapter 14. Those were the real conquests. We had imagined that our pursuers, the ape men, knew nothing of our brushwood hiding place, but we were soon to find out our mistake. There was no sound in the woods, not a leaf moved upon the trees, and all was peace around us. But we should have been warned by our first experience how cunningly and how patiently these creatures can watch and wait until their chance comes. Whatever fate may be mine through life, I am very sure that I shall never be nearer death than I was that morning. But I will tell you the thing in its due order. We all awoke exhausted after the terrific emotions and scanty food of yesterday. Summerlee was still so weak that it was an effort for him to stand, but the old man was full of a sort of surly courage which would never admit defeat. A council was held, and it was agreed that we should wait quietly for an hour or two where we were, have our much-needed breakfast, and then make our way across the plateau and round the central lake to the caves where my observations had shown that the Indians lived. We relied upon the fact that we could count upon the good word of those whom we had rescued to ensure a warm welcome from their fellows. Then, with our mission accomplished and possessing a fuller knowledge of the secrets of Maple White Land, we should turn our whole thoughts to the vital problem of our escape and return. Even Challenger was ready to admit that we should then have done all for which we had come, and that our first duty from that time onwards was to carry back to civilization the amazing discoveries we had made. We were able now to take a more leisurely view of the Indians, whom we had rescued. They were small men, wiry, active, and well-built, with lank black hair tied up in a bunch behind their heads with a leathern thong, and leathern also were their loincloths. Their faces were hairless, well-formed, and good-humoured. The lobes of their ears, hanging ragged and bloody, showed that they had been pierced for some ornaments which their captors had torn out. Their speech, though unintelligible to us, was fluent among themselves, and as they pointed to each other and uttered the word Akala many times over, we gathered that this was the name of the nation. Occasionally, with faces which were convulsed with fear and hatred, they shook their clenched hands at the woods round and cried, "Doda! Doda!" which was surely their term for their enemies. "What do you make of them, Challenger?" asked Lord John. "One thing is very clear to me, and that is that the little chap with the front of his head shaved is a chief among them." It was indeed evident that this man stood apart from the others, and that they never ventured to address him without every sign of deep respect. He seemed to be the youngest of them all, and yet so proud and high was his spirit that upon Challenger laying his great hand upon his head, he started like a spurred horse, and with a quick flash of his dark eyes, moved further away from the professor. Then, placing his hand upon his breast and holding himself with great dignity, he uttered the word Maritas several times. The professor, unabashed, seized the nearest Indian by the shoulder and proceeded to lecture upon him as if he were a potted specimen in a classroom. "The type of these people," said he in his sonorous fashion, "whether judged by cranial capacity, facial angle, or any other test, cannot be regarded as a low one. On the contrary, we must place it as considerably higher in the scale than many South American tribes which I can mention. On no possible supposition can we explain the evolution of such a race in this place. For that matter, so great a gap separates these ape men from the primitive animals which have survived upon this plateau that it is inadmissible to think that they could have developed where we find them." "Then where the deuce did they drop from?" asked Lord John. "A question which will no doubt be eagerly discussed in every scientific society in Europe and America," the professor answered. My own reading of the situation, for what it is worth, he inflated his chest enormously and looked insolently around him at the words, is that evolution has advanced under the peculiar conditions of this country up to the vertebrate stage, the old types surviving and living on in company with the newer ones. Thus we find such modern creatures as the tapir, an animal with quite a respectable length of pedigree, the great deer, and the anteater in the companionship of reptilian forms of Jurassic type. So much is clear. And now come the ape-men and the Indian. What is the scientific mind to think of their presence? I can only account for it by an invasion from outside. It is probable that there existed an anthropoid ape in South America who in past ages found his way to this place, and that he developed into the creatures we have seen, some of which, here he looked hard at me, were of an appearance and shape which, if it had been accompanied by corresponding intelligence, would, I do not hesitate to say, have reflected credit upon any living race. As to the Indians, I cannot doubt that they are more recent immigrants from below. Under the stress of famine or of conquest, they have made their way up here. Faced by ferocious creatures which they had never before seen, they took refuge in the caves which our young friend has described. But they have no doubt had a bitter fight to hold their own against wild beasts, and especially against the ape-men, who would regard them as intruders and wage a merciless war upon them, with a cunning which the larger beasts would lack. Hence the fact that their numbers appear to be limited. Well, gentlemen, have I read you the riddle aright, or is there any point which you would query? Professor Summerlee for once was too depressed to argue, though he shook his head violently as a token of general disagreement. Lord John merely scratched his scanty locks with the remark that he couldn't put up a fight as he wasn't in the same weight or class. For my own part, I perform my usual role of bringing things down to a strictly prosaic and practical level by the remark that one of the Indians was missing. "He has gone to fetch some water," said Lord Roxton. "We fitted him up with an empty beef tin, and he is off." "To the old camp?" I asked. "No, to the brook. It's among the trees there. It can't be more than a couple of 100 yards, but the beggar is certainly taking his time." "I'll go and look after him," said I. I picked up my rifle and strolled in the direction of the brook, leaving my friends to lay out the scanty breakfast. It may seem to you rash that even for so short a distance I should quit the shelter of our friendly thicket, but you will remember that we were many miles from Ape Town, that so far as we knew, the creatures had not discovered our retreat, and that in any case, with a rifle in my hands, I had no fear of them. I had not yet learned their cunning or their strength. I could hear the murmur of our brook somewhere ahead of me, but there was a tangle of trees and brushwood between me and it. I was making my way through this at a point which was just out of sight of my companions, when, under one of the trees, I noticed something red huddled among the bushes. As I approached it, I was shocked to see that it was the dead body of the missing Indian. He lay upon his side, his limbs drawn up, and his head screwed round at a most unnatural angle, so that he seemed to be looking straight over his own shoulder. I gave a cry to warn my friends that something was amiss, and running forwards, I stooped over the body. Surely my guardian angel was very near me then, for some instinct of fear, or it may have been some faint rustle of leaves, made me glance upwards. Out of the thick green foliage which hung low over my head, 2 long muscular arms covered with reddish hair were slowly descending. Another instant, and the great stealthy hands would have been round my throat. I sprang backwards, but quick as I was, those hands were quicker still. Through my sudden spring they missed a fatal grip, but one of them caught the back of my neck, and the other one my face. I threw my hands up to protect my throat, and the next moment the huge paw had slid down my face and closed over them. I was lifted lightly from the ground, and I felt an intolerable pressure forcing my head back and back until the strain upon the cervical spine was more than I could bear. My senses swam, but I still tore at the hand and forced it out from my chin. Looking up, I saw a frightful face with cold, inexorable light blue eyes looking down into mine. There was something hypnotic in those terrible eyes. I could struggle no longer. As the creature felt me grow limp in his grasp, 2 white canines gleamed for a moment at each side of the vile mouth, and the grit tightened still more upon my chin, forcing it always upwards and back. A thin, oval-tinted mist formed before my eyes, and little silvery bells tinkled in my ears. Dully and far off, I heard the crack of a rifle, and was feebly aware of the shock as I was dropped to the earth, where I lay without sense or motion. I awoke to find myself on my back upon the grass in our lair within the thicket. Someone had brought the water from the brook, and Lord John was sprinkling my head with it, while Challenger and Summerlee were propping me up, with concern in their faces. For a moment I had a glimpse of the human spirits behind their scientific masks. It was really shock rather than any injury which had prostrated me, and in half an hour, in spite of aching head and stiff neck, I was sitting up and ready for anything. "But you've had the escape of your life, young fellow, my lad," said Lord Roxton. "When I heard your cry and ran forward and saw your head twisted half off and your stow-wassers kicking in the air, I thought we were one short. I missed the beast in my flurry, but he dropped you all right and was off like a streak. By George, I wish I had 50 men with rifles. I'd clear out the whole infernal gang of them and leave this country a bit cleaner than we found it." It was clear now that the 8 men had in some way marked us down, and that we were watched on every side. We had not so much to fear from them during the day, but they would be very likely to rush us by night, so the sooner we got away from their neighborhood the better. On 3 sides of us was absolute forest, and there we might find ourselves in an ambush. But on the 4th side, that which sloped down in the direction of the lake, there was only low scrub, with scattered trees and occasional open glades. It was, in fact, the route which I had myself taken in my solitary journey, and it led us straight for the Indian caves. This, then, must for every reason be our road. One great regret we had, and that was to leave our old camp behind us, not only for the sake of the stores which remained there, but even more because we were losing touch with Zambo, our link with the outside world. However, we had a fair supply of cartridges and all our guns, so, for a time at least, we could look after ourselves, and we hoped soon to have a chance of returning and restoring our communications with our Negro. He had faithfully promised to stay where he was, and we had not a doubt that he would be as good as his word. It was in the early afternoon that we started upon our journey. The young chief walked at our head as our guide, but refused indignantly to carry any burden. Behind him came the 2 surviving Indians with our scanty possessions upon their backs. We 4 white men walked in the rear with rifles loaded and ready. As we started, there broke from the thick, silent woods behind us a sudden great ululation of the 8 men, which may have been a cheer of triumph at our departure or a jeer of contempt at our flight. Looking back, we saw only the dense screen of trees, but that long, drawn yell told us how many of our enemies lurked among them. We saw no sign of pursuit, however, and soon we had got into more open country and beyond their power. As I tramped along, the rearmost of the 4, I could not help smiling at the appearance of my 3 companions in front. Was this the luxurious Lord John Roxton who had sat that evening in the Albany amidst his Persian rugs and his pictures in the pink radiance of the tinted lights? And was this the imposing professor who had swelled behind the great desk in his massive study at Enmore Park? And finally, could this be the austere and prim figure which had risen before the meeting at the Zoological Institute? No 3 tramps that one could have met in a Surrey lane could have looked more hopeless and bedraggled. We had, it is true, been only a week or so upon the top of the plateau, but all our spare clothing was in our camp below, and the 1 week had been a severe one upon us all, though least to me, who had not to endure the handling of the 8 men. My 3 friends had all lost their hats and had now bound handkerchiefs round their heads. Their clothes hung in ribbons about them, and their unshaven, grimy faces were hardly to be recognized. Both Summerlee and Challenger were limping heavily, while I still dragged my feet from weakness after the shock of the morning, and my neck was as stiff as a board from the murderous grit that held it. We were indeed a sorry crew, and I did not wonder to see our Indian companions glance back at us occasionally with horror and amazement on their faces. That night we camped in a pleasant glade beside a clear stream. The Indians built us a shelter of branches and leaves, and for the first time in many days we felt something like security. As we sat round the fire, Challenger spoke with unusual gravity. "Those were the real conquests," said he, waving his hand toward the dark plateau behind us. "The conquest of nature, the subjugation of the savage and the brute. We have faced them, and we have prevailed. And yet, gentlemen, I sometimes wonder whether the greatest conquest of all is not the conquest of ourselves." We talked long into the night of our adventures and of the wonders we had seen. The stars shone brightly above us, and the strange cries of the plateau seemed far away. For the moment, at least, we were safe, and the road to the Indian caves lay open before us. Those were the real conquests, the conquests of courage, of friendship, and of the unquenchable spirit of discovery. And as I drifted toward sleep that night, I felt that whatever lay ahead, we had already won something greater than any trophy or specimen we might carry back to the world below. Chapter 15. Our eyes have seen great wonders. I have said that on the occasion of our first arrival at the Indian caves, we had not been able to see how great was the number of our newfound friends. When, however, they all assembled round the fire, and we saw them all, men, women, and children, it was an impressive sight. There were about 400 of them in all, and they formed the most primitive community which the mind of man could conceive. They were all more or less of the same type, small, active, wiry men with long black hair and good-humored, intelligent faces. The women were of much the same build as the men, but with gentler and more feminine features. The children were sturdy little creatures, many of them quite young. They were all dressed in the same simple fashion, the men in a short tunic of some soft bark cloth, the women in a longer garment of the same material. The chief, old Moretus, and his son, the young chief whom we had rescued, sat with us in the place of honor. Through the young chief, who had picked up a little English from some former traveler, we were able to carry on a conversation. The old chief told us how his people had lived for many generations upon the plateau. They had come originally from the lowlands, driven upward by the cruelty of a great king. Here they had found safety from their enemies, but they had also found a new and terrible foe in the ape men, with whom they had been at constant war ever since. "They are very strong and very cunning," said the old chief. "They come down upon us in the night and carry away our women and children. Many of our young men have died fighting them. But now that you great white men have come, perhaps we shall be able to drive them back forever." We spent several delightful days among these friendly people. They showed us all over their wonderful city of caves. Some of the caves were very large, and in them we found stores of dried fruits, roots, and other food. In others they kept their simple weapons, spears with flint heads, bows and arrows, and stone axes. Challenger was in the 7th heaven of delight. He measured heads, examined weapons, made notes upon their language, and collected specimens of everything he could lay his hands on. Summerlee, too, was busy with his notebook, while Lord John and I spent much of our time exploring the surrounding country with parties of Indian hunters. One day they took us to see the great lake in the center of the plateau. It was a wonderful sight. The water was clear and blue, and in it we could see many strange creatures swimming. Upon the shores were herds of iguanodons and other great reptiles peacefully feeding. In the air above us flew pterodactyls with their leathery wings. "Our eyes have seen great wonders," said Challenger solemnly, as we stood upon the shore of the lake. "We have looked upon the world as it was in the days of its youth. We have seen the living past face to face. But our greatest discovery was yet to come. One evening, as we sat round the fire, the young chief came to us with a grave face. 'There is something which you must see,' he said. 'Tomorrow we will take you to the place of the great beasts.' The next morning we set out with a strong party of Indians. They led us across the plateau to a part which we had not yet visited. Here, in a deep valley, we came upon a sight which filled us with amazement. In this valley were gathered together many of the great reptiles of the ancient world. There were stegosaurs with their strange armor, triceratops with their great horns, and in the distance we could see the huge bulk of a brontosaurus moving among the trees. It was like a scene from some primeval paradise. Challenger was beside himself with joy. "This," he cried, "is the crowning wonder of all. Here we have a complete picture of Jurassic life preserved for us through the ages." We spent many hours watching these wonderful creatures. The Indians told us that they never molested them unless driven by hunger, and that the great beasts rarely came near their caves. That night, as we sat once more round the fire in the amphitheater, we felt that we had indeed seen great wonders. We had looked upon the living past, we had walked with the monsters of old time, and we had found a kindly and gentle people living in the midst of these wonders. "Our eyes have seen great wonders," said Challenger once more. "And when we return to the world, as return we must, we shall carry with us knowledge which will change the thought of mankind." But as I lay that night in my cave and looked out at the stars shining above the lost world, I wondered whether we should ever be able to return, or whether this strange plateau would be our home for the rest of our lives. Chapter 16. A Procession, a Procession. I should wish to place upon record here our gratitude to all our friends upon the Amazon for the very great kindness and hospitality which was shown to us. Even with the help of the faithful Negro Zambo and the two half-breeds, it would have been an impossible task to have got our canoes and our stores down to the river without the assistance of the friendly Indians of the plateau. Our departure from the caves was a scene which I shall never forget. The whole tribe turned out to bid us farewell. There was much shouting and singing, and the young chief whom we had rescued was carried shoulder high through the amphitheater. We white men were treated with the greatest respect and affection. The old chief made a long and dignified speech, and the young chief presented us with gifts, beautiful feather headdresses and necklaces of bright stones. We, in turn, gave them what we could spare of our remaining possessions. Then we set out. The Indians accompanied us as far as the edge of the plateau. There, with many expressions of goodwill on both sides, we parted. We watched them until their figures grew small in the distance and finally disappeared among the trees. The descent of the cliffs was difficult and dangerous, but with the help of ropes and the knowledge we had gained, we managed it safely. Once at the bottom, we struck across the forest toward the river. After many adventures and narrow escapes, we reached the spot where Zambo was still faithfully waiting for us with the canoes. What a joyful meeting that was! The great Negro danced and shouted with delight when he saw us. He had remained loyal through all the long weeks, living upon what he could find in the forest and keeping watch over our remaining stores. We paddled down the river, and after many days reached the Amazon once more. From there, we made our way to Manaus and finally took ship for England. Our return to London was a strange experience. At first, no one would believe our story. The newspapers laughed at us. The scientific world was openly skeptical. Even our own friends looked at us with pitying eyes. But we had our specimens, our photographs,
and, best of all, our own firm conviction of the truth. At last, a great meeting was arranged at the Zoological Institute. The hall was packed. Challenger, Summerlee, Lord John, and I sat upon the platform. When Challenger rose to speak, there was a storm of derision. But as he told his story, and as we showed our specimens and photographs, the laughter died away. By the end of the evening, the great audience was cheering wildly. "A procession! A procession!" they cried. And so, in the end, we were carried shoulder high through the streets of London, 4 dusty, travel-worn men who had looked upon wonders such as no men had seen before. But for me, the greatest wonder of all was something very different. When the excitement had died down a little, I made my way to the house where Gladys lived. I found her waiting for me, as I had always known she would be. "You have done it, Ned," she said softly. "You have found your heroic deed." And as I took her in my arms, I knew that the greatest adventure of all was only just beginning. Thus ended the strange journey into the lost world. But who shall say what other wonders still lie hidden in the unknown places of the earth?